Hey there, tonight we're unwrapping the tale of a Victorian Christmas, where a single orange was like a golden ticket. Not the Dickensian fairy tale, you know, but a harsh reality where citrus was the ultimate holiday treasure. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets of Victorian England weren't just cobblestone paths. They were the backdrop to a Dickensian drama of epic contrasts, where the chasm between rich and poor was as wide as the River Thames. If you were strolling through London during the late 1800s, you'd notice two parallel universes, one dripping in opulence and another gasping for sustenance. It was a time when the wealthy decked halls with boughs of holly, and the less fortunate clung to the hope of finding a single orange in their stocking, a citrus fruit that could very well have been mistaken for a lump of gold. Now, let's put on our history hats and dive into this tale of economic disparity. The Victorian era, named for Queen Victoria's reign from 1837 to 1901, was a period marked by industrial revolution and social upheaval. The rich were really rich, with incomes that could make a modern hedge fund manager jealous. We're talking about folks who wouldn't flinch at dropping 100 guineas on a Christmas feast, which is like spending over £10,000 today, just to add a sprinkle of context. Meanwhile, the average working-class family was living on a shoestring budget. Picture this. A skilled tradesman might earn about 20 shillings a week, roughly £1.50 in today's money, scarcely enough to cover the essentials when you factor in rent, food, and a little something called the rest of life. The cost of living, especially in urban areas, could eat up most of these earnings, leaving little room for luxuries like a festive ham or, heaven forbid, a turkey. For many, Christmas was less about feasts and more about making ends meet. To add to the mix, here's a sobering statistic. By 1889, about 35% of Londoners were living in abject poverty. That's right, over a third of the population was struggling to keep the wolf from the door. This stark reality explains why an orange, a fruit from sunny Spain or Italy, was such a big deal. It was a rare treat, a sweet reprieve from the monotony of daily bread and gruel, a splash of Mediterranean sunshine in the grey, foggy streets of London. Let's not forget that Victorian society was obsessed with appearances, and Christmas was no exception. The wealthy competed in an unspoken game of who could throw the most extravagant holiday bash. We're talking tables groaning under the weight of goose, venison, and enough plum pudding to sink a ship. And the presents? Think silver tea sets, silk dresses, and for the kids, elaborate toys that would put modern-day playthings to shame. A far cry from the stockings of the poor, where a penny toy, a few nuts, and if they were lucky, that prized orange might appear. But before you start thinking the Victorians were all about the bling, let's throw in a twist. The era also marked the birth of the Christmas we know today, with traditions like Christmas cards and crackers making their debut. Even the Christmas tree, popularized by Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, became a household staple. Yet, it was a symbol of aspiration more than reality for many. If you were in the lower rungs, you might have had a makeshift tree, perhaps just a branch, decorated with homemade ornaments. It was the spirit of the thing, not the grandeur, that mattered. So why did an orange hold such allure? For one, it was a symbol of the exotic, a taste of the world beyond the smoggy horizon. In a time before supermarkets, having access to fresh fruit in winter was nothing short of miraculous. Plus, an orange had a certain je ne sais quoi that a potato simply couldn't match. It was the kind of gift that symbolized hope and joy, wrapped in the promise of better days. It was also a testament to the resourcefulness of the poor, who found meaning and celebration in the smallest of things. In essence, the Victorian Christmas was a microcosm of the society at large, a mix of glittering celebration and grim reality. It was a time when families gathered around their hearths, whether humble or grand, and shared what little they had. The wealthy might have had more to give, but the poor found joy in simplicity, in the shared experience of a holiday that, for a few days at least, promised warmth and unity. And that orange, sweet and vibrant, was the beacon of that promise. As we leave behind the cozy hearths and Victorian Yuletide cheer, let's embark on a journey that an orange would have taken, a trek that rivals any epic saga. Picture this, a fruit plucked from sun-drenched groves in Spain or Italy, destined for the foggy streets of London. The journey of an orange was no casual jaunt. It was an odyssey fraught with logistical hurdles that would make even the most seasoned traveler break a sweat. To start, let's talk geography. Those Mediterranean groves were no hop, skip, and a jump away. We're looking at a distance of over 1,000 miles, give or take a few detours around pirate-infested waters and the occasional tempest. In practice, this meant oranges had to be harvested, packed, and shipped with military precision. And they were not traveling solo. These oranges hitched a ride with other perishables like olives, wine, and of course more oranges. Now, the journey overland to the nearest port was only the beginning. Once at sea, the oranges faced perilous conditions, not just weather, but the very real risk of spoilage. Remember, we're talking about a world without refrigerated cargo ships, no handy Frigidaire to keep things fresh. Instead, oranges were packed in crates, insulated with straw, and stowed in the coolest part of the ship. Sea voyages could take weeks, and all it took was a few bad apples, or in this case, oranges, to spoil the whole bunch. Upon reaching the docks of a bustling port city like London, our citrus heroes would face yet another set of challenges. Customs officials, who might have been more interested in pocketing a bribe than inspecting fruit, could delay the process. And let's not forget the dockworkers, who had a Dickensian reputation for misplacing goods. It's no wonder oranges were a rarity by the time they reached the market stall. Speaking of markets, let's talk economics. The price of an orange was no trifling matter. By the time it reached a vendor, that single orange could cost several pence, a considerable chunk of the average worker's weekly wage. Now, if you're scratching your head wondering just how much a penny was really worth, consider this. A loaf of bread was about 2 pence, and a pint of milk was a penny. So, an orange was akin to the price of a small meal. For those living on the edge, this was no small investment. To put this into perspective, the average Victorian labourer in the 1880s earned about 20 shillings a week, which in modern terms is roughly £50. When you're counting every penny to cover essentials like rent, coal and bread, spending on an orange was like splurging on a bottle of vintage champagne today. It was a luxury that required careful consideration and often a special occasion to justify. Yet, this was more than a mere supply chain issue. The demand for oranges was fueled by a growing fascination with all things exotic. Victorian England was in the throes of an imperial binge, and anything that evoked distant lands was the height of fashion. An orange was more than just a fruit. It was a taste of the empire, a tangible link to the far-flung corners of a British dominion that spanned the globe. This allure, coupled with its scarcity, made the orange the diamond of the produce world. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that each orange was a small, fragile boat sailing through a storm of economic and logistical challenges. The journey from a Mediterranean grove to a London market was a testament to human enterprise and resilience, but it was also a stark reminder of the inequities that defined the era. The same systems that allowed an orange to travel such great distances also ensured that only a few could afford the luxury of tasting it. In the end, the voyage of an orange was a microcosm of Victorian society itself, a world where the extraordinary was possible, but only for those who could afford the ticket. As we peel back the layers of this story, we find that the humble orange was more than just a fruit. It was a symbol of aspiration, a taste of the exotic, a reminder of the vast and often harsh distances between the haves and the have-nots. The journey of an orange, like that of many Victorians, was one of survival against the odds, a story of hope and hardship wrapped in a vibrant, citrus-scented package. So, as we continue our citrus saga, let's peel back another layer. You see, the Victorian orange wasn't just a fruit, it was a cultural icon, a symbol of something much larger than its vitamin C content. For the poor, it was a rare indulgence, a sweet escape from the drudgery of everyday life. But how did this humble fruit become such a Christmas sensation? Let's dive into the myths, the realities, and the rich tapestry of Victorian sentiment, all wrapped up in a neat little orange peel. First, we need to address the romanticized tales that have painted oranges as the golden apples of Victorian Christmases. You might have heard the charming story of a Dickensian street urchin, eyes wide with wonder, clutching an orange like it's the Holy Grail. These tales, while heartwarming, often gloss over the gritty truths. In reality, for many Victorian children, an orange was the closest they got to a taste of the exotic. It was a status symbol, an emblem of wealth and the global reach of the British Empire, all wrapped up in a shiny, dimpled skin. To get a feel for the contemporary buzz around this citrus celebrity, let's dip into some period literature. In A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens doesn't specifically mention oranges, but the idea of a luxurious Christmas feast is central. The Cratchit family, with their humble goose and excited chatter, reflects the yearning for a slice of prosperity. However, it's the lesser-known writers like George R. Sims who truly capture the essence of the orange as a cherished gift. In his poem, In the Workhouse, Christmas Day, Sims poignantly contrasts the meager Christmas offerings of the poor to the lavish indulgences of the rich, highlighting just how precious an orange could be. Newspapers of the day also give us a peek into the orange's place in the Victorian zeitgeist. The Illustrated London News of December 1848 describes the Christmas season as a time when the rich and the powerful heap their tables with every luxury, while the less fortunate make do with simpler pleasures. Yet it goes on to note the joy a single orange could bring to a child, a sentiment echoed in countless letters to the editors and personal anecdotes published throughout the 19th century. Now, let's get into some economic nitty-gritty. Why was the orange such a big deal? It wasn't just the journey we've already explored, though that epic trek certainly added to its mystique. No, it was also about supply and demand, good old-fashioned economics. You see, the Victorian era was a time when the British Empire was flexing its global muscles. This meant that exotic goods were flooding into London, and oranges were at the forefront of this fruity invasion. However, they were still a seasonal delicacy, with December being prime orange time thanks to the Mediterranean harvest. The cost of these oranges, as we touched on earlier, was prohibitive for many. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the expense, there was a growing middle class eager to indulge in the luxuries once reserved for the elite. This burgeoning demographic helped transform the orange from an exotic rarity into the quintessential Christmas treat. It became a symbol of aspiration, a way for the middle class to partake in the opulence of the upper echelons without breaking the bank entirely. Yet, let's not kid ourselves. The orange was still out of reach for the very poorest. For those in the most desperate circumstances, an orange was not just a luxury, it was a fantasy. This is where the myth-making comes in. Stories of poor children finding an orange in their stocking play into a collective yearning for a world where magic and generosity might transcend grim realities. It's the same reason we tell tales of Santa Claus and flying reindeer. Sometimes, a little fantasy helps us cope with the harshness of life. But just because something's a myth doesn't mean it's devoid of truth. The symbolic power of an orange, its ability to light up a child's face on Christmas morning, was very real. This wasn't just about the fruit itself, but what it represented. Hope, joy, and a connection to a world beyond the soot and smog of industrial London. So, as we've seen, the orange was more than a fruit. It was a cultural touchstone. It captured the Victorian imagination, embodying the era's contradictions, its wealth and poverty, its global reach and local struggles, its romance and its reality. And as we peel back these layers, we find a story that's as vibrant and complex as the era itself. As we continue our journey through this Victorian Christmas tale, keep in mind that while the orange might have been just a fruit, its impact was anything but simple. It was a small, spherical beacon of hope in a world that was often as sour as it was sweet. So stay tuned, because there's more to this story than meets the eye or the taste buds. And speaking of tales as vibrant as an orange itself, let's not overlook the heavyweight influencer of Victorian Christmas lore, none other than Charles Dickens. The man was basically the social media guru of his day, using his pen like a hashtag to trend social issues. His novella, A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, was the ultimate viral sensation, spreading faster than a Victorian case of the sniffles. But here's the kicker. While it painted a picture of redemption and goodwill, it also glossed over the gritty underbelly of Victorian society like a fresh coat of whitewash on a crumbling wall. Dickens was no stranger to the harsh realities of life. he had lived them. But in A Christmas Carol, he opted for a tale of transformation, where even the grumpiest miser could be turned into a benevolent benefactor with a little ghostly intervention. It was the ultimate feel-good story, but let's be real. Most of the Scrooges in real life didn't get visited by spirits on Christmas Eve. The novella did shine a light on social inequalities, but it also created a comforting narrative that wealth and charity could coexist, allowing the affluent to feel good about themselves without really addressing systemic poverty. Now, let's pivot to the other major player in this Christmas drama, the royal family, specifically Queen Victoria and her Germanic imports. When Prince Albert, Victoria's hubby, dragged a Christmas tree into Windsor Castle, he sparked a Yuletide revolution. Suddenly, everyone wanted a tree, just like the royals. It was the 19th century equivalent of keeping up with the Kardashians, but with more pine needles and fewer paparazzi. The Christmas tree became a symbol of domestic bliss, a centerpiece for family gatherings and goodwill. But behind this facade of unity and festivity, the stark divide between the classes remained firmly intact. Queen Victoria's reign was marked by a delicate balance of public image and private opulence. The royal family's Christmas traditions were broadcast like a period reality show, complete with Christmas cards and family portraits. The public gobbled it up, and soon the middle class was imitating these customs, transforming them into quintessential British traditions. Yet, this regal influence also served as a distraction from the everyday struggles of the working class. It was a classic case of bread and circuses, with a sprig of Harley thrown in for good measure. The social narratives crafted by Dickens and the royal family were like the wrapping paper on a Christmas gift, beautiful on the outside, but hiding a box of societal discord underneath. They provided a comforting story that made people feel all warm and fuzzy, distracting them from the fact that many were just trying to get through the winter without freezing or starving. It was a masterclass in public relations, Victorian style. But let's not dismiss the allure of these narratives entirely. They offered hope and a sense of community, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the spirit of Christmas could bring people together. Yet, as the era progressed, these stories were also used to justify the status quo, suggesting that charity and goodwill could solve problems that really required systemic change. The economic landscape of the time was a paradox, a booming industrial economy that created immense wealth and crushing poverty in equal measure. While the upper echelons of society enjoyed elaborate Christmas feasts and exchanged luxurious gifts, the working class might have been scraping together coins for a modest holiday meal. The disparity was as glaring as a pudding set alight with brandy, and yet the myth of a universally merry Christmas persisted. In a way, the Victorian Christmas was a microcosm of the era's contradictions, a time of both progress and inequality, of opulence and deprivation. Oranges and Christmas trees became symbols of aspiration, but they also highlighted the gaping divide between those who could afford such luxuries and those who could only dream of them. So as we unwrap this chapter of history, remember that the stories we tell about Christmas are as much about what we wish for as they are about what really was. Dickens and the royals provided a narrative of hope and unity, but the reality was often far less rosy. As we peel back the layers of Victorian Christmas, we find a rich tapestry woven with threads of myth and reality, a story as complex and bittersweet as the era itself. Stay tuned, because this historical sleigh ride isn't over yet. We've still got more to explore in the frosty depths of a Victorian winter, where the real magic lies in the untold stories of those who lived it. So here we are, standing in the frosty glow of a Victorian Christmas, where oranges glisten like jewels amidst the snow-dusted dreams of the past. But let's not let the romantic veneer fool us. The Victorian Christmas was as much about illusion as it was about reality. Fast forward to today, and you'll find we're still wrestling with the ghost of Christmas past. Only now, it's wrapped in a glossy sheen of consumerism. The Victorian Christmas myth has persisted for over a century, and it's not just because we all have a soft spot for Dickensian tales of redemption and figgy pudding. It's because the myth offers us a narrative of simplicity and warmth, a comforting story that stands in stark contrast to our modern holiday chaos. But let's be real. The Victorian Christmas was anything but simple for the majority of people living it. The magic often glossed over the grinding poverty and social inequities that plagued the era. Today, we still cling to this idealized vision of Christmas, even as we elbow our way through Black Friday sales and stress over finding the perfect gift. The Victorian era gave birth to many of the holiday traditions we hold dear, from Christmas trees to card exchanges, but it also laid the groundwork for the holiday consumerism we know all too well. The fact that we now spend an average of £700 per person during the festive season, according to recent surveys, is a testament to how far we've stretched those Victorian notions of Christmas cheer. But there's a reason we keep coming back to the Victorian Christmas myth. It offers an antidote to the relentless commercialism of the modern holiday season. The idea of a simpler, more heartfelt celebration appeals to our nostalgic sensibilities, even if it never really existed in the way we imagine. The Victorian Christmas, with its emphasis on family, charity, and goodwill, provides a counterpoint to the frenzy of gift-giving and material excess that often defines our contemporary celebrations. Yet, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that the Victorians had it all figured out. The era was rife with contradictions. While the wealthy indulged in extravagant feasts and lavish parties, the poor often faced empty tables and cold hearths. The societal divide was as glaring as the flickering gas lamps lining the streets. And yet, this disparity was wrapped up in a narrative of festive unity, a myth that allowed the privileged to feel benevolent without challenging the status quo. In our modern world, the myth persists not just because it's a comforting tale, but because it serves as a reminder of what we aspire to during the holidays. We might not live in a Dickensian novel, but the themes of charity and community remain relevant. Amidst the tinsel and trappings, the Victorian ideal offers a glimpse of a Christmas where the spirit of giving transcends materialism, even if that vision is more rooted in fiction than fact. And here comes the twist. The very things we cherish about the Victorian Christmas, its emphasis on family, tradition, and togetherness, are often overshadowed by a relentless pursuit of more. More gifts, more decorations, more everything. It's a curious kind of irony that the Victorian spirit of Christmas, which so many of us yearn for, is often drowned out by our own consumer-driven desires. This isn't to say that the Victorians didn't enjoy their share of holiday indulgence. They were pioneers of the modern Christmas celebration, after all, but their idea of extravagance was a far cry from the shopping sprees and endless sales that define today's holiday season. The average Victorian family might have splurged on a special meal or a few small gifts, but the emphasis was on the experience rather than the quantity. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The Victorian Christmas myth persists because it offers us a template for a holiday that's both nostalgic and aspirational. It's a story we tell ourselves to capture a sense of warmth and community that feels increasingly elusive in our fast-paced, technology-driven world. But as we embrace this myth, it's worth remembering the realities that lay beneath the surface, the struggles and inequalities that the narrative often glosses over. In the end, the legacy of the Victorian Christmas is a reminder of the tension between idealism and reality, between the myths we cherish and the truths we sometimes prefer to ignore. It's a story that continues to shape our modern celebrations, even as we grapple with its complexities. As we gather around our Christmas trees and share in the joys of the season, let's take a moment to acknowledge the rich and often contradictory history that brought us here. So next time you peel an orange or hang a bauble on a tree, remember that you're part of a narrative that stretches back through the centuries. It's a tale woven with threads of myth and reality, a story that's as much about hope and aspiration as it is about tradition and nostalgia. And perhaps, amidst the glitter and gift wrap, there's room for a little Victorian magic after all. In the throbbing heart of ancient history, where the dust of time is thick, and the narratives are often shinier than a polished chariot, the Neo-Babylonian Empire emerges with a flair that makes today's reality TV look like a high school play. It all starts around 626 BCE with Nabopolassar, a name that sounds like it could be a villain in a fantasy novel. But in reality, it was the mastermind who decided Babylon deserved to be more than just a vacation spot for Assyrian kings. Nabopolassar didn't start with a bang. No, he was more of a slow burn, the kind that sneaks up on a complacent empire like the Assyrians, who were too busy patting themselves on the back to notice the rebellion brewing in the south. With a savvy blend of political cunning and sheer determination, Nabopolassar wrested control from the Assyrians, turning Babylon from a backwater to the bustling epicenter of a new empire. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a tech startup becoming a unicorn overnight, except with more swordplay and significantly fewer PowerPoint presentations. Now, speaking of Babylon's rise, let's talk economics, because what's an empire without a thriving economy? The Neo-Babylonian Empire was strategically perched along the Euphrates River, which was basically the I-95 of the ancient world. If you wanted to move goods, you either floated them down the river or lugged them across the desert, hoping your donkey didn't have an existential crisis halfway through. Agriculture was the bread and butter, literally, of the Babylonian economy. The fertile lands of the Euphrates Valley were the ancient equivalent of a golden goose. They produced wheat, barley, and dates in abundance, feeding not just the locals but fueling trade with neighboring regions. It's said that a bushel of barley could cost as little as 1.5 shekels, which might sound cheap until you realize that the average Babylonian didn't exactly have a wallet full of shekels. In fact, the cost of a loaf of bread, at about 1/360th of a shekel, was a significant chunk of your daily earnings if you were just an average Joe, or should I say, an average Nabu. And while the bread was cheap, luxury items were a whole different ballgame. The Babylonians were savvy traders, dealing in textiles that would make even a modern fashionista swoon. Their dyed wool garments were the haute couture of the ancient world, fetching high prices across the region. These were no ordinary threads. We're talking colors so vibrant they seem to defy nature, thanks in part to the extraction of dyes from plants and insects in a process that was half chemistry and half magic. Beyond textiles, the Neo-Babylonians had a penchant for luxury goods that would make even today's billionaires blush. Gold, silver, precious stones. They accumulated them with the same zeal as a dragon guarding its hoard. The city of Babylon itself was a marketplace of dreams, a place where traders from across the known world converged, bringing with them spices, ivory, and exotic animals. If you had the shekels, you could buy yourself a pet monkey or a peacock to strut around your villa, because why not? But here's a fun twist. While the grandeur of Babylon might tempt you to romanticize it as a city of endless opulence, the reality for most was less glamorous. The average Babylonian citizen toiled in the fields or workshops, their lives a cycle of labor and taxation, ensuring the elite could enjoy their luxuries. It was a society built on a foundation of stark contrasts, where the glimmering facade of wealth hid the sweat and toil that supported it. So, why does any of this matter? Well, the ebb and flow of trade, the agricultural bounty, and the luxury markets not only filled Babylon's coffers, but also fueled its ambitions. These economic engines powered Babylon's ability to maintain its military might and construct monumental works like the famed Ishtar Gate, a testament to the empire's wealth and power. And while we're on the topic of myth vs. reality, let's dispel a few illusions. The Neo-Babylonians were not just a bunch of hedonists lounging in ziggurats. They were shrewd, strategic, and above all, survivors in a world where empires rose and fell like the tides. Nabopolassar and his successors, including the legendary Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, understood that economic prosperity was the key to sustaining their empire's power. They knew that without the steady flow of trade and agriculture, their grand designs would crumble like a poorly built mud brick wall during the rainy season. So there you have it, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, a dazzling mix of ambition, economic prowess, and the occasional pet monkey. It's a story that reminds us of the complex layers beneath the glittering surface of history. A tale where the cost of bread can tell you more about an empire's strength than any grand monument ever could. And as we dig deeper into the Neo-Babylonian saga, remember, every shekel, every grain of barley, every bolt of dyed wool was a thread in the intricate tapestry that was Babylon's legacy. Stay tuned, because the story is just getting started. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next in this ancient soap opera. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of Babylon's story, where architectural ambition meets royal ego in a grandiose display of "look what I built." Enter Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, the king who knew how to make a statement. If Babylon were a rock band, Nebuchadnezzar would be its flamboyant lead singer, leaving a legacy of monumental structures that were as much about aesthetic beauty as they were about making sure his name was etched into the annals of history. But before we get swept away by tales of towering ziggurats and lush gardens, let's take a moment to appreciate the man behind the myth. Nebuchadnezzar Roman II reigned from 605 to 562 BCE, a period when Babylon wasn't just a city. It was the asterisk city. Think of it as the New York of its time, a vibrant hub where the ancient world collided in a swirl of commerce, culture, and inevitably some good old-fashioned power struggles. Nebuchadnezzar was the ultimate city planner, setting out to transform Babylon into a showcase of opulence and architectural prowess that would dazzle both locals and visitors. His crowning glory, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which, if ancient lore is to be believed, were a verdant paradise suspended in the air, a marvel of engineering that would make even the most ambitious skyscraper seem like a garden shed. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticism for just a second. The Hanging Gardens are one of those historical enigmas that historians love to debate over coffee. Were they real? Were they a figment of someone's overactive imagination? The truth is, concrete evidence of their existence is about as elusive as a unicorn in a desert. Ancient writers like Strabo and Philo of Byzantium waxed lyrical about these gardens, yet they seem more like ancient travel bloggers spinning a yarn than reliable sources. Despite this, the myth persisted, largely because it was such a good story. After all, who wouldn't want to believe in a king so enamored with his Median wife, Amades, that he created an entire green oasis to remind her of her mountainous homeland? Yet, if we dig a little deeper, the Hanging Gardens weren't just about marital bliss. They were a masterstroke of royal PR, a way for Nebuchadnezzar to flex his kingly muscles and say, "Look what I can do." It was the ancient equivalent of posting an impossibly perfect Instagram photo, complete with just the right filter and a hashtag like #KingLife. Meanwhile, down at ground level, the reality of building such marvels was a bit more, shall we say, earthy. Imagine the laborers toiling in the scorching sun, laying brick after brick under the watchful eyes of overseers who made sure the king's grand vision didn't falter. It wasn't all water lilies and love stories. It was sweat, grit, and engineering ingenuity. Speaking of engineering, let's talk ziggurats. These were the pyramids of Mesopotamia, massive stepped structures that dominated the skyline and served as temples to the gods. Nebuchadnezzar's most famous ziggurat was the Eremenenki, dedicated to Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. Standing at around 91 meters, or 300 feet for those keeping score in ancient cubits, it was a testament to the empire's wealth and piety. But let's not forget the little detail that these awe-inspiring structures needed a small army of workers to bring them to life. Picture thousands of laborers, likely conscripted from conquered lands, hauling mud bricks and stones under the blistering sun. This was no DIY weekend project. It was a monumental endeavor requiring logistical prowess, and let's be honest, a fair bit of coercion. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was as much about building an empire of stone as it was about maintaining the one of flesh and blood. His military campaigns expanded Babylon's borders, securing the city as a dominant force in the region. Yet, even as the king marched his armies across deserts and rivers, his mind was never far from his beloved Babylon. And why not? With every brick laid and every garden planted, he was cementing his legacy, ensuring that when people spoke of great cities, Babylon would be the first name on their lips. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, Nebuchadnezzar's architectural ambitions were about more than just vanity. They were a reflection of the Neo-Babylonian Empire's economic might. As the empire's coffers swelled with the riches of trade and conquest, the king funneled these resources into his building projects, creating a city that was as much a symbol of power as it was a thriving economic center. You've got to hand it to him. Nebuchadnezzar understood the power of image in shaping an empire's legacy. He knew that while military victories might win you territories, it was the monuments that would etch your name into history. So, while the Hanging Gardens may remain a tantalizing mystery, and the ziggurats a testament to ancient engineering, what we can say for sure is that Nebuchadnezzar was a ruler who understood the art of spectacle. He was the showman king, balancing the harsh realities of empire building with the softer allure of myth-making. It's a delicate dance that rulers throughout history have tried to master, and Nebuchadnezzar was no different. He simply had a bigger stage and a grander vision. As we continue to unravel the story of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, remember that behind every stone laid and every myth spun, there was a purpose, a strategy, and most importantly, a story waiting to be told. The tale of Babylon is far from over, and as we explore further, we'll see how the threads of ambition, power, and myth weave together to create an empire that, even in its ruins, continues to captivate our imaginations. So stay tuned, because the next act of this ancient drama promises more intrigue and insight into a world that, despite the centuries, isn't as different from ours as we might think. As we peel back the layers of this ancient tapestry, let's zoom in on the everyday life of Babylonian society, a world where the class divide was as vast as the Euphrates and just as influential. It's a tale of two cities, really, one of opulence and the other of toil. Picture the bustling streets of Babylon, where the elite strolled in their vibrant, dyed garments. Think ancient Gucci, while the majority of citizens trudged through their daily grind, ensuring the empire's gears kept turning. In this grand play of life, the scribes were the unsung heroes, or perhaps better dubbed as the IT professionals of their time. Armed not with laptops, but with reed styluses, these folks were the gatekeepers of knowledge in a society that ran on clay tablets like today's runs on gigabytes. Becoming a scribe was no walk in the hanging gardens, though it required years of meticulous training, a luxury afforded mainly to the sons of the elite. These scribes recorded everything from tax accounts to epic poetry, wielding their styluses with the precision of a surgeon. They were indispensable, ensuring that the king's decrees reached the far corners of the empire and that the grain supplies didn't mysteriously vanish into thin air. Meanwhile, down in the fields, the farmers were the backbone of Babylonian society. They toiled in the fertile crescent of the Euphrates Valley, a region so agriculturally rich it could make the modern Midwest look like a sandbox. But let's not romanticize this pastoral life. Farming in Babylon wasn't a leisurely stroll through sunlit fields. It was grueling, back-breaking work. With irrigation systems to maintain and harvests to secure, these farmers worked sunup to sundown, with the looming threat of drought or flood always on the horizon. Their lives literally depended on the success of their crops, because, spoiler alert, a failed harvest could mean starvation or ruin. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, it turns out the social dynamics and economic structures of Babylon were as complex as a Babylonian love poem. The hierarchy was clear. At the top were the nobles and priests, who enjoyed the fruits of others' labor. Below them were the skilled workers and traders, who formed the middle class. At the bottom, the farmers and laborers, whose sweat and toil supported the entire system. And then there were the slaves, who had even fewer rights than the humble barley stalks they harvested. Speaking of rights, let's talk about Babylonian law. Enter Hammurabi's code, an early legal system that was less innocent until proven guilty, and more, don't even think about it. This wasn't Hammurabi's good-natured advice column. It was a series of strict edicts with punishments as severe as a Mesopotamian summer sun. An eye for an eye, absolutely. But it also had a surprising degree of sophistication, addressing everything from property rights to workers' wages. The code served as a tool to maintain order in a society where the balance of power needed constant adjustment. Mind you, these laws weren't just about keeping the peasants in line. They reflected a deeper understanding of human nature and the need for social stability. The Babylonians knew that a well-fed, fairly treated worker was less likely to revolt and burn the granaries. And while the nobility might have seemed untouchable, they too were bound by these laws, albeit with a bit more leeway. After all, you can't have a system without a little grease to keep the wheels turning. So, where does this leave us in our exploration of Babylon? Well, as we continue to dig through the clay tablets of history, it's clear that the Babylonian Empire was a complex machine, with each cog and wheel playing a crucial role. From the scribes documenting the empire's narrative to the farmers feeding its people, every aspect of society was intertwined in a dance that was as much about survival as it was about legacy. In this ancient world, power wasn't just about who sat on the throne. It was about who controlled the flow of information, who tilled the land, and who enforced the laws. It's a lesson as old as time, yet as relevant today as it was then. The Babylonians understood that a stable society required more than just grand monuments. It needed a foundation built on the labor and cooperation of its people. And so, as we leave the streets of Babylon for now, remember that behind the myths and marvels lay a society as intricate and fragile as the clay tablets that recorded its history. The story of the Neo-Babylonian Empire is far from over, and in the next chapter, we'll uncover more about this ancient civilization's enduring legacy. Stay tuned, because the tale of Babylon is a saga that promises to keep surprising us with its lessons and revelations. As we leave behind the bustling streets of Babylon and its multifaceted society, let's take a cosmic leap into the skies above, where the Neo-Babylonians practiced their own ancient brand of celestial navigation. And no, we're not talking about some romantic starry-eyed strolls under the night sky. For the Babylonians, astrology was serious business, an existential game of cosmic chess with the gods themselves. You see, the Babylonians were convinced that the heavens were like a divine scoreboard, a place where the gods left cryptic messages about their plans for humanity. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a tweet from the universe. Every celestial event, from the ordinary twinkle of a star to the dramatic appearance of a comet, was scrutinized more closely than a celebrity's latest social media post. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. Babylonian astrology was not about predicting personal fortunes or love lives. This was no horoscope in the back of a glossy magazine. Instead, it was about divining the fate of the empire. The king's advisors would meticulously chart the movements of the planets and stars, seeking omens that would forecast the success of a military campaign or the likelihood of a bumper harvest. It was astrology with a capital A, a blend of science, superstition, and statecraft. These celestial scribes, known as Baru priests, wielded their astrological charts like a modern-day analyst wields a stock market graph. They kept records on clay tablets, documenting everything from lunar eclipses to the positions of Venus and Jupiter. And while these records might sound like the ancient equivalent of a mundane spreadsheet, they were anything but. The Babylonians believed these celestial patterns held the keys to understanding the whims of the gods, keys that could unlock prosperity or unleash calamity. Yet, as with many things Babylonian, there's a myth to bust here. While the romantic notion of a society guided by stars is appealing, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, calculated. The Babylonians were not merely at the mercy of celestial whims. They were shrewd observers and mathematicians. Their astronomical calculations were precise, their predictions often grounded in careful observation and a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of the cosmos. In fact, these ancient skywatchers were so adept that they could predict lunar eclipses with an accuracy that would impress even today's astronomers. They noticed cycles, like the 18-year Saros cycle of eclipses, long before the Greeks gave it a name. They understood the periodicity of celestial events and could forecast them with a precision that, let's face it, would leave most of us struggling with our high school math homework in the dust. And speaking of math, let's give credit where it's due. Babylonian mathematics was as complex as their societal structures, with a knack for number crunching that would put some modern accountants to shame. They operated on a sex-age symbol, base 60 system, which might sound like a headache waiting to happen, but was actually quite ingenious. It allowed for easier calculations of fractions and large numbers, perfect for dividing up land, planning irrigation, or, predicting the wrath of the gods. Now, you might be wondering why all of this mattered. Why did the Babylonians invest so much time and effort into celestial observations? The answer, as always, lies in power and control. In a world where natural disasters could wipe out entire crops and enemy armies could appear on the horizon with little warning, the ability to read the future was invaluable. It gave the rulers a sense of control over the uncontrollable, a way to make informed decisions in an unpredictable world. And let's not forget the political angle. A well-timed prediction of a solar eclipse could be used to legitimize a king's reign, or even dissuade enemies from launching an attack. It was the ultimate PR tool, a way to bolster the king's divine mandate and keep the populace in line. In a society where the gods were seen as the ultimate arbiters of fate, having a hotline to the heavens was akin to having the ultimate ace up your sleeve. But before we get too carried away by the image of these ancient astrologers as mystical seers, remember that their work was also deeply rooted in the practicalities of survival. The ability to predict the flooding of the Euphrates or the coming of a drought could mean the difference between feast and famine. Their cosmic calculations were not just about appeasing the gods, but about ensuring the empire's continued prosperity. So, as we peer into the night sky with our Babylonian friends, we see a world not just of stars and constellations, but of power plays and political machinations. The heavens were a theater where gods and men played out their drama, a place where the fate of empires could be read by those who knew how to look. And as we prepare to delve further into the intricate tapestry of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, remember that the story of Babylon is written not just in the stones of its ruins, but in the stars above. The tale of this ancient civilization is as much about the celestial as it is the terrestrial, a saga that continues to unfold as we explore the mysteries of a world both familiar and fantastical. Stay tuned, because in our next chapter, we'll uncover more of these cosmic connections, and perhaps find ourselves a little more starstruck by the sophistication and savvy of an empire that dared to read the sky. But just as quickly as the stars align, so too do they sometimes conspire against you, as the Neo-Babylonians learned the hard way. Enter stage left. Cyrus the Great, the Persian king who nonchalantly waltzed into Babylon around 539 BCE, like he was just popping over for some tea and empire taking. Now, if you're picturing a dramatic siege with battering rams and flaming arrows, let's put a pin in that. Cyrus wasn't about that life. In fact, his conquest was more like a political chess game than a military blitzkrieg. To understand how the seemingly impenetrable Babylon fell, we need to talk about a little thing called hubris, that overconfidence that makes you think you're untouchable until someone like Cyrus comes around to remind you that you're not. Babylon's rulers, particularly Nabonidus, who was on the throne when Cyrus came knocking, were a bit too comfortable, resting on the laurels of their predecessors like Nebuchadnezzar. Nabonidus had a penchant for religious reforms and eccentricities that didn't sit well with the priests and the populace. It's like he was trying to change the playlist at a party where everyone else just wanted to hear the classics. Meanwhile, Cyrus was busy crafting his image as a liberator, not a conqueror. He didn't just stroll into Babylon with swords drawn. He sauntered in with promises of restoring order and respecting local customs and religions. It was a masterclass in political strategy. By the time he entered Babylon, many of the city's inhabitants were probably more than ready to roll out the welcome mat, tired of Nabonidus's shenanigans and eager for a change. And just like that, the mighty walls of Babylon, which were once thought to be unassailable, proved to be more of a psychological barrier than a physical one. Speaking of those legendary walls, let's get a reality check. The Babylonians weren't the only ones with a flair for the dramatic. Ancient historians had a tendency to embellish with the zeal of a gossip columnist. Herodotus, for instance, claimed that Babylon's walls were so wide that a chariot drawn by 4 horses could turn on top of them. Spectacular imagery, sure, but likely more fiction than fact. The walls were impressive, but they weren't magic. They couldn't stop the tide of political dissatisfaction that Cyrus capitalized on so superbly. The fall of Babylon is a classic example of how empires often crumble not so much from external pressures, but from internal weaknesses. The Neo-Babylonians had built their empire on economic prosperity and military might, but they underestimated the power of a well-timed political maneuver. Cyrus's takeover wasn't just about conquest. It was a smooth transition of power that left Babylon intact, its culture respected, and its people largely undisturbed. So, what's the takeaway from Babylon's grand finale? First, never underestimate the power of public relations and political acumen. Cyrus's conquest is a lesson in how perception can be as potent as military might. Second, remember that an empire's strength lies not just in its physical fortifications, but in its ability to adapt and respond to the needs of its people. And lastly, let's not forget that history loves a good myth, but reality often has the juicier plot twists. As for Babylon's legacy, it's a cocktail of awe-inspiring achievements and cautionary tales. The city's monumental architecture, artistic achievements, and pioneering work in mathematics and astronomy have left a lasting mark on history. Yet, It's also a reminder that even the mightiest can fall when they lose sight of the basics, keeping your people happy and your enemies guessing. The fascination with Babylon endures because it represents both the pinnacle of human achievement and the pitfalls of human nature. It's the story of a civilization that reached for the stars, literally and metaphorically, but also one that serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of resting on your laurels. In the grand tapestry of history, Babylon is a reminder that while legends might capture our imagination, it's the real stories, the gritty, complex, and often uncomfortable truths that offer the most profound lessons. So next time you gaze up at the stars, think of the Babylonian scribes who first charted their courses and the kings who sought to divine their fates. Remember the walls that couldn't hold back change and the city that, despite its fall, still stands as a symbol of human ambition and creativity. In the end, Babylon teaches us that while empires may rise and fall, their stories, both real and mythic, continue to illuminate our past and inform our future. And that, dear friends, is a legacy worth remembering. You step into the vibrant chaos of Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire, as if you've landed in a cross between a bustling street fair and a turbocharged Wall Street. The sun's barely rolled out of bed, but the city is already alive, humming with the energy of over 200,000 people. Think of it as New York City before New York was a twinkle in anyone's eye, with a little less Starbucks and a lot more human sacrifices. As you navigate through the labyrinth of canals, bridges, and causeways, you're drawn to Tlaxcala, the city's marketplace. It's not your average weekend farmer's market, unless your local market has exotic birds cawing in a cacophony overhead and thousands of people jostling like it's Black Friday every day. On any given day, more than 60,000 people cram into this commercial hotspot. Yes, you heard that right. 60,000. That's like the entire population of a small town descending on your local shopping center. And you thought waiting in line at the checkout was bad. Tlaxcala is the economic engine of an empire that stretches from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, an area about the size of modern-day France. The stakes are high, and so is the noise level, with vendors hawking everything from cacao beans to finely woven textiles. The air is thick with the smell of burning copal incense, mingling with the earthy aroma of fresh produce and the less pleasant scent of animal hides. Welcome to the sensory overload that is Aztec capitalism in full swing. Your first lesson in Aztec economics comes courtesy of the cacao bean. Forget gold or silver. In this world, cacao is king. These little nuggets of bliss serve as currency, with a single bean enough to buy you a tamale or a couple securing a good night's sleep at an inn. An anthropologist's dream, or a chocoholic's nightmare. You decide. But it's not all beans and bartering. Political and social nuances are as thick as the crowd around you. Tlaxcala is more than just a marketplace. It's a living, breathing symbol of Aztec prowess and a stark reminder of their imperial reach. The goods you see here aren't just local. They're a testament to the empire's extensive trade networks, stretching across mountains and jungles, bringing in the likes of tropical bird feathers and rare minerals. You might notice a young merchant trying to sell a macaw, its feathers a dazzling spectrum of blues and reds, an exotic status symbol for any self-respecting Aztec noble. And what about that jaguar pelt? It's not just for decoration, it's a statement piece, equivalent to a designer suit in today's world, indicating wealth and power. The Aztecs knew how to flaunt it, but as you meander through the throng of humanity, the stark realities of this world become apparent. Behind the colorful facade lies a system built on conquest and tribute. The goods you're admiring, some were acquired through less than friendly means. The Aztecs had a knack for expanding their empire through strategic alliances, and when those didn't work, well, let's just say they preferred the hostile takeover approach. Conquered regions were expected to pay tribute, often in the form of these very goods. It's a harsh reminder that while the marketplace is a wonder of commerce, it's also a testament to the empire's unyielding grip. As you dodge a cart laden with freshly caught fish from Lake Texcoco, you might hear snippets of Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, blending with the dialects of traders from distant lands. The market is a melting pot, a precursor to the globalized trade networks we see today. But don't get too romantic about it. Remember, this is also a place where human lives hang in the balance, quite literally. The Aztecs had a unique way of ensuring their guards stayed on their good side by offering human hearts as sacrifices. Nothing like a little existential dread to spice up your shopping trip. By mid-morning, you're feeling the pressure. The noise, the smells, the sheer volume of humanity. It's enough to make you want to retreat to the nearest quiet, air-conditioned room. But there's no escape in the Aztec capital. You're in the thick of it now, and there's no turning back. You watch as a group of parchdecker or professional merchants glide through the crowd. These guys are the big leagues, the ancient equivalent of CEOs. They've traveled vast distances, sometimes months at a time, braving hostile territories to bring back goods that would make your local import-export specialist weep with envy. They carry not just goods but vital intelligence, acting as unofficial spies who report back to the emperor himself. Talk about multitasking. Yet amidst the hustle and bustle, there's a sense of order, a rhythm to the madness. You notice the marketplace is divided into sections, each dedicated to specific goods. One for food, another for textiles, another for tools. It's a well-oiled machine, a testament to the Aztecs' organizational prowess. But don't be fooled into thinking this is a democratic free-for-all. The marketplace is tightly controlled, with officials known as Tianquistly overseeing transactions and ensuring nobody tries to pull a fast one. As the sun climbs higher and the market swells with even more people, you begin to understand why you wouldn't last a day here. It's not just the sensory overload or the sheer number of bodies. It's the realization that every transaction, every interaction, is part of a larger, intricate web of commerce and politics. This isn't just about buying and selling. It's about maintaining the empire's dominance, one cacao bean at a time. By now, you're longing for a quiet corner to decompress, maybe with a refreshing drink that doesn't involve bartering for beans. But as you look around, you realize there's still so much more to see. More stories hidden in the stalls and alleyways of Tlaxcalco. The day is far from over, and the lessons of the Aztec marketplace have only just begun. As you shake off the days and press further into the beating heart of Tlaxcalco, the sensory bombardment only intensifies. The visual assault of vibrant colors hits you first. Stalls teem with textiles so richly dyed you'd think they'd been spun by a rainbow on steroids. These aren't just any fabrics. They're woven tapestries of status, splashed in purples and reds that scream wealth. Colors so prized they might cost you a couple of hundred cacao beans, if not your firstborn. The soundtrack of this bustling bazaar is a symphony of shouts and chatter, with vendors hawking their wares like auctioneers on caffeine. Each call is punctuated by the clang of copper bells, an early form of marketing jingle. The air thrums with the rhythm of Nahuatl, the lingua franca of the Aztec Empire, blending with the dialects of traders who have trekked from lands you've only read about in history books. And then there's the olfactory onslaught. If only smell-o-vision were a thing, you'd be overwhelmed by the competing fragrances of spices, herbs, and the occasional whiff of something less savory emanating from the animal stalls. Imagine the aroma of fresh vanilla pods mingling with the pungency of dried chilies. It's a sensory roller coaster that leaves your nostrils reeling and your stomach rumbling. Amidst this chaos, you might stumble upon a stall dedicated to the mystical allure of feathers. These aren't your run-of-the-mill backyard bird feathers. We're talking about the resplendent plumage of quetzals and macaws. In the Aztec world, these feathers were akin to holding shares in Apple or Tesla today, symbols of status and wealth, and just as volatile depending on the whims of fashion. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of Aztec economics, because in this world money talks, and sometimes it talks in beans. The Aztecs had a currency system that was as innovative as it was tactile. Forget the jingle of coins in your pocket. Here, the clink-clink was replaced by the rustle of cacao beans. These were the real deal, the original bean counters, if you will. A single cacao bean might fetch you a tamale, while 100 could buy you a turkey. Now, that's inflation-proof currency for you. But cacao beans weren't the only players in this game of economic chess. Quatchley, a sort of woven cloth, also held currency value and was often used for larger transactions. Think of it as the Aztec equivalent of a $100 bill, only far more practical if you needed an emergency toga. The marketplace is a living tableau of bartering brilliance. Picture yourself trying to negotiate with a vendor over the price of obsidian blades, where the stakes are high, and your haggling skills will be put to the test. Here, The art of persuasion isn't just a skill, it's a survival tactic. And if you think you've been ripped off at a flea market, try bartering for a jaguar pelt here without losing your shirt or your dignity. Yet, to navigate this economic labyrinth, you'd need more than just a fanny pack full of beans. Understanding this system required a crash course in Aztec social studies. The value of goods was deeply entwined with the social and political fabric of the empire. Tribute goods, such as maize or cotton, were often brought in from conquered territories, highlighting a complex web of power dynamics. But don't let the romanticism of bartering fool you. Behind every transaction lurks the harsh reality of an empire built on tribute and conquest. The goods lining the stalls often represent the spoils of war, extracted from regions now under Aztec control. The marketplace isn't just a hub of commerce. It's a microcosm of the empire's might, a testament to the Aztec rulers' ability to consolidate power and resources. Look around, and you might catch sight of the Tianquistli, the marketplace officials, observing transactions with a keen eye. These guys are the original regulators, ensuring that every deal is on the up and up. They wield their authority to maintain order in this bustling metropolis of trade, their presence a constant reminder that in the Aztec world, commerce and control go hand in hand. And as you navigate this maze of humanity, you begin to see how the marketplace serves as a reflection of the Aztec Empire itself, complex, vibrant, and relentless. It's a world where tradition and innovation collide, where the past and future intertwine in a dance as intricate as the patterns woven into the textiles on display. By now, your head is spinning with the sheer scale of it all. You're not just a bystander here, you're a participant in a living history lesson. Every stall, every transaction, every interaction paints a broader picture of a civilization at the height of its power. The day is far from over, and as the sun casts long shadows across Tlaxcala, you realize there's still much to uncover in this ancient marketplace. The lessons of the Aztec world continue to unfold, one cacao bean at a time. As the sun dips lower, throwing long shadows over the Tlaxcala marketplace, you're just starting to peel back the layers of this cultural onion. The social fabric here is as intricate as the finest Aztec weaving, with threads of power, prestige, and politics interwoven into every interaction. You see, the marketplace wasn't just an economic engine. It was the social media of its day, a place where reputations were made and marred, alliances forged and fractured, all in the time it takes to haggle over the price of a turkey. Now, let's talk artisans. These folks were the rock stars of the Aztec world. Skilled craftsmen, known as Tolteca, held a special status, revered for their ability to turn raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Whether it was the shimmering obsidian blades or the intricate jewelry made from turquoise and gold, these artisans were the influencers of their time. They didn't just make stuff, they crafted the very identity of the Aztec elite. But don't think for a second that life was all glitter and glamour for the Tolteca. They had to navigate a complex hierarchy with guilds and apprenticeships that made sure only the best rose to the top. And if their work didn't meet the standards, let's just say the critique wasn't limited to a bad Yelp review. On the flip side, we have the merchants, those ruthless titans of trade who make Gordon Gekko look like a Girl Scout. Known as Parchdecker, these were the Wall Street wolves of Tenochtitlan. They didn't just trade goods, they traded in secrets too. Picture them as a cross between a CEO and a CIA operative. They trek across treacherous terrains, from the tropical coasts to the highlands of Oaxaca, bringing back goods and intelligence with equal aplomb. Their role wasn't just about commerce, it was about maintaining the empire's strategic advantage. In this world, information was as valuable as gold, and the Parchdecker were the empire's eyes and ears. But let's not romanticize it too much. The marketplace was also a den of backstabbing and betrayal. Espionage was as common as bargaining, with merchants and nobles alike employing their own spies to gather intel on rivals. The place buzzed with gossip, the lifeblood of political maneuvering. Alliances could shift faster than the price of maize, and a poorly chosen word could lead to a fall from grace, if not something more permanent. It's a Machiavellian playground where trust is a luxury few could afford. And you better believe there were rules, strict ones. The Aztec marketplace wasn't a free-for-all. It was regulated with military precision. Officials known as Tianquistli patrolled the stalls, ensuring that every transaction was above board. They enforced a code of conduct that would make the IRS proud. Break the rules, and you wouldn't just get a slap on the wrist. Theft or fraud could lead to brutal consequences, including fines, confiscation of goods, or even execution. Yeah, imagine getting the death penalty for shoplifting. Aztecs didn't mess around when it came to maintaining order. Now, you might think that with all these layers of control and hierarchy, there'd be little room for personal agency. But that's where you'd be wrong. The marketplace was a stage where individuals could rise above their station through sheer wit and skill. A talented artisan could catch the eye of a noble, while a shrewd merchant might secure a lucrative trade deal that catapulted them into the upper echelons of society. In a way, it was the ultimate meritocracy. Harsh, unforgiving, but filled with opportunity for those brave enough to seize it. As you weave through the throngs, you begin to appreciate the marketplace as a microcosm of Aztec society itself, a place where the lines between commerce, politics, and culture blur into a vibrant tapestry. It's a world where the stakes are as high as the mountains surrounding the Valley of Mexico, and every transaction is a thread in the empire's grand narrative. The sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the bustling stalls, and you realize that the marketplace is far more than an economic hub. It's the beating heart of a civilization at its zenith. With the day drawing to a close, the tempo of the market shifts. The vendors' calls soften, and the throngs of people begin to thin. But the lessons of Tlaxcalco remain etched in your mind, a reminder of a world that thrived on the edge of chaos and order, innovation and tradition. You've only scratched the surface, and as the night swallows the market in its embrace, you know there's still so much more to uncover about the Aztec world. The story doesn't end here. It's only just beginning, one cacao bean at a time. As the market begins to wind down, you might think you've seen it all, but hold onto your loincloth, because the Aztec culinary scene is about to take you on a wild ride. The food stalls of Tlaxcalco are like a gastronomic wonderland, if your idea of wonderland includes delicacies that might make a modern foodie blanch. The Aztecs had a palate that was as adventurous as their expansionist policies, and their culinary prowess was nothing short of legendary. First up, the tamale, an Aztec staple that's probably the most familiar item to your 21st century taste buds. Wrapped in corn husks and filled with a variety of ingredients, tamales were the ancient equivalent of fast food, minus the drive-through. You could snag one for a couple of cacao beans, making it a cost-effective way to fuel your day. But don't get too comfortable. The Aztec diet was anything but predictable. Now, let's talk about chapulines. If you're squeamish about bugs, you might want to skip this part, or embrace your inner Bear Grylls. These grasshoppers were a crunchy, protein-packed snack seasoned with chili and lime. You might find yourself hesitating before popping one into your mouth, but for the Aztecs, chapulines were a delicacy. Think of them as the original trail mix, perfect for those long treks across the empire. And hey, they're gluten-free. But the Aztecs didn't stop at grasshoppers. Their protein sources were as diverse as their empire, featuring everything from axolotls, a type of salamander, to amaranth seeds, which were often mixed with honey to create a sweet treat. Their diet was a testament to their ingenuity, making the most of what the land had to offer. It's a culinary philosophy that would put modern farm-to-table movements to shame. Let's not forget the exotic delicacies that graced the tables of the elite. The Aztecs had a penchant for luxury, and their markets reflected this. Turtle eggs, iguana, and even the occasional jaguar steak were on the menu, reserved for the upper echelons of society. These were the Aztec equivalents of caviar and foie gras, symbols of status and power. It's a reminder that while the empire was vast, its wealth was concentrated in the hands of the few. But before you get too starry-eyed about this ancient foodie paradise, let's confront the elephant in the marketplace: hygiene, or rather, the lack thereof. The bustling markets were a breeding ground for all sorts of unsavory bacteria. The concept of food safety was as foreign as a European galleon, and the risk of illness was ever present. The Aztecs may have mastered the art of cooking, but they hadn't quite nailed the art of refrigeration. You think that with all these culinary delights, the Aztec marketplace would be the pinnacle of gastronomic achievement. But remember, this was a time when running water was a luxury and sanitation was more of a suggestion than a rule. The market was a melting pot, not just of cultures and ideas, but of germs. The vibrant array of foods came with a side of potential gastrointestinal roulette, a reminder that every meal was a gamble. Yet, amidst the chaos, the market served as a cultural crucible, a place where culinary ideas mingled as freely as the traders themselves. It was here that the Aztecs' love for cacao was born, a love affair that would eventually conquer the hearts and stomachs of the world. Their zacatl, a frothy, bitter chocolate drink, was the Starbucks frappuccino of its day, a luxury for the elite and a tantalizing taste of the divine. So, while you might hesitate to try a grasshopper taco, remember that the Aztec marketplace was a world of contrasts, where culinary innovation met harsh realities, and every bite was a testament to survival. The Aztecs didn't just eat to live, they lived to eat, embracing flavors and textures that might challenge our modern sensibilities, but were essential to their identity. As the sun sets and the market slowly empties, you're left pondering this ancient world of taste and texture. It's a reminder of the Aztec Empire's ability to adapt and thrive, turning even the most humble ingredients into a feast fit for an emperor. But don't get too comfortable. You've still got a journey ahead, and the next chapter in this marketplace saga promises even more surprises. So, grab your tamale, brace yourself for the unexpected, and keep those cacao beans handy. You're going to need them. So, as you munch on your tamale and ponder the wonders of Tlaxcala, let's talk about the legacy this market left behind. The Aztec marketplace was more than a hub of trade. It was a cultural powerhouse that shaped perceptions of the Aztecs for centuries to come. But before we pop the cork on the champagne of nostalgia, let's sift through the myths and realities that make this place both legendary and misunderstood. Tlaxcala, at its height, was a marvel of economic and social engineering. Imagine if Amazon and the New York Stock Exchange had a baby, and then dressed it in vibrant feathers and obsidian jewelry. But this wasn't just a marketplace. It was the pulse of an empire that, at its peak, stretched over 80,000 square miles. The goods flowing through Tlaxcala weren't just about commerce. They were the lifeblood of a civilization, a testament to the Aztecs' remarkable ability to adapt and dominate. Yet, as with all great stories, there's a flip side, the harsh reality of an empire teetering on the brink of collapse. By the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire was a powder keg of discontent, its vast territories held together by a fragile web of tribute and fear. Tlaxcala was both a symbol of Aztec abundance and a reminder of the empire's dependence on the very regions it subjugated. The tribute system, which had once filled the markets with exotic goods, was also a ticking time bomb. Resentment brewed in the conquered cities, and the marketplace, with its dazzling array of products, was a daily reminder of the Aztecs' iron grip. And then along came Hernan Cortés, the guy who showed up uninvited and left with the proverbial silverware. When Cortés and his band of merry conquistadors arrived in 1519, Tlaxcala was at the heart of an empire ripe for the taking. The marketplace, with its organized chaos and bustling trade, must have seemed like a scene from a fever dream to the Spaniards. They were reportedly awestruck by the sheer scale of it all, a testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity and their empire's might. But let's not romanticize this encounter as a simple culture clash or a meeting of minds. The fall of Tenochtitlan and its marketplace was brutal, a testament to the harsh realities of conquest. The goods that had once flowed through Tlaxcala were now the spoils of war, stripped from the hands of the people who had built this empire. The Aztec market, once a beacon of civilization, became a casualty of European expansion, its legacy tangled in the narratives of conquerors. Yet, despite the Spanish conquest, the spirit of the Aztec marketplace didn't just vanish into the annals of history. Its influence lingers, a ghostly reminder of a world where cacao beans were currency and feathers were worth their weight in gold. The Aztec approach to trade, their intricate systems of barter and tribute, echoed through the centuries, shaping the economic landscapes that followed. And let's not forget the cultural impact. The Aztec love affair with cacao, for instance, has left an indelible mark on the world. The frothy, bitter drink known as zacatl might have evolved into the sweet chocolate we indulge in today, but its roots are deeply embedded in the rich soil of Aztec innovation. The marketplace's culinary contributions are a testament to the empire's enduring legacy, a reminder that while empires fade, their cultural imprints remain. But as we wrap up this whirlwind tour, Let's not ignore the myths that surround the Aztec marketplace. The romanticized tales of abundance and prosperity often gloss over the harsh realities of life in an empire built on conquest. The bustling bazaar, with its vibrant stalls and chaotic energy, was also a place of political intrigue and social tension. The marketplace was a stage where the Aztecs showcased their might, but it was also a reflection of an empire struggling to maintain its grip. So, as you finish your tamale and prepare to leave the echoes of Tlaxcala behind, consider this. The Aztec marketplace was a marvel of its time, a place where commerce, culture, and politics collided in a dazzling display of human ingenuity. But it was also a reminder of the fragility of empires, the delicate balance between power and prosperity. The lessons of the Aztec marketplace continue to resonate today, a testament to the enduring complexities of human civilization. In the end, the story of Tlaxcala is one of resilience and adaptation, a narrative that transcends the bounds of time. The marketplace may have been lost to history, but its spirit lives on, a reminder of a world where trade was a thread that wove together the fabric of society. So, as you step away from the marketplace, remember that the legacy of Tlaxcala is more than just a footnote in history. It's a testament to the enduring power of human connection and commerce, one cacao bean at a time. In the bustling corridors of the Tang dynasty court, where elegance met intrigue, Wu Zetian was a young concubine with ambition sharp enough to cut through the silk of her surroundings. When Wu arrived at Emperor Taizong's court in 637 AD, a mere 13-year-old girl, she was but one flower in a garden of many. The imperial harem was a veritable smorgasbord of beauty and talent, a place where whispers held more power than swords, and where position was as precarious as a juggler on a unicycle. Wu, however, came equipped with more than just looks. She had the kind of intelligence that could make a chess grandmaster sweat. Now, let's get something straight. Being a concubine wasn't all luxury and lounging. It was more like participating in a reality show where the prize was survival and maybe a little influence if you were lucky. The palace was a hotbed of jealousy, rumors, and power plays, and Wu quickly learned that she had to be more than just a pretty face to get ahead. She had to be clever, crafty, and occasionally a little ruthless. It wasn't long before her sharp wit and keen political instincts began to set her apart. Wu's rise didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't the sort of Cinderella story Disney would adapt anytime soon. The reality was more Machiavellian than magical. Her initial position as a low-ranking concubine meant she was more likely to be found cleaning than counseling. But oh, did she observe. She watched the political machinations with the kind of focus a cat reserves for an unsuspecting mouse. She understood that knowledge was power, and she gathered it like a squirrel hoarding nuts for winter. One of Wu's strategies was her ability to read the room, a skill as valuable then as it is now. She knew when to speak and, just as importantly, when to keep silent, a talent that probably saved her neck more than once. She also had a knack for strategic alliances, what we might call networking today. And in a court where alliances could shift faster than the wind, Wu's ability to navigate this treacherous landscape was nothing short of remarkable. Her real break came when she caught the attention of Taizong's son, Lai Zhai, the future Emperor Gaozong. While the elder emperor was still on the throne, Wu managed to charm the sarks off the younger prince, though I'm pretty sure sarks weren't in vogue back then. This budding relationship was less about romance and more about opportunity. When Emperor Taizong died in 649 AD, Wu was sent to a Buddhist nunnery, as was customary for concubines of a deceased emperor. But Wu Zetian was not one to accept a life of seclusion without a fight. In a twist that would make a soap opera writer proud, Wu managed to leave the convent and re-enter the palace under Gaozong's rule. How? By leveraging her previous ties with him. It was a bold move, and it paid off. Her return to the palace was like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and she quickly ascended the ranks, soon being named a consort. This is where Wu's story veers sharply away from the typical. She wasn't content with being a mere consort. She had her eyes on a more significant prize. With Gaozong as her ally, she began to accumulate power, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of demanding it outright, Wu worked behind the scenes, influencing decisions and managing court affairs with precision. It was like watching a grandmaster play chess, except the pieces were people and the stakes were life and death. Wu's ability to outmaneuver her rivals was legendary. She was a master of what we now call soft power, influence that doesn't come from force, but from persuasion and manipulation. And she had plenty of opportunities to hone her skills, given the constant palace intrigue. Every day was a new episode in the ongoing drama of court life, filled with enough plot twists to make a thriller novelist jealous. Of course, all this ambition and political savvy didn't make Wu popular with everyone. She had her share of detractors, those who bristled at her rise to power. But Wu wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She knew that power was never given, it had to be taken. And take it she did, with a combination of charm, intellect, and a little help from her friends, or at least those she hadn't outwitted yet. As Wu Zetian climbed the ladder, she didn't just step on toes, she practically danced on them. Her ascent was a testament to her unmatched ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court life, a skill that would eventually see her become the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right. But that, dear listener, is a story for another time. For now, suffice it to say that Wu was no ordinary consort. She was a force of nature, a political whirlwind that would reshape the very fabric of the Tang dynasty. With Wu Zetian's ambitions as vast as the Tang Empire itself, her story was far from over. After Emperor Taizong's death in 649 AD, the palace drama cranked up a notch. Imagine the imperial court as a high-stakes game of musical chairs, except the music never stopped, and the chairs were always on fire. When Wu was sent to a Buddhist nunnery, it seemed like her chapter had closed. But in true Wu fashion, it was merely an intermission. Returning to the palace wasn't a simple U-turn on the road to obscurity. It required a mix of cunning, charm, and maybe a dash of daring that would make even James Bond take notes. By 655 AD, Wu had not only returned, but had also married Emperor Gaozong, Taizong's successor. Now, marrying the emperor sounds like a fairy tale ending, but let's not kid ourselves. It was more of a political masterstroke. Wu was back in the game, and this time she wasn't playing for second place. Her marriage to Gaozong was a strategic alliance, akin to merging two powerful companies in modern business terms. The union solidified her influence, and not in the happy wife, happy life kind of way. Wu was the power behind the throne, the puppet master pulling the strings, and she was just getting started. Her role in state affairs was anything but decorative. Wu was the imperial equivalent of a CEO, overseeing decisions, guiding policies, and managing the court like a Fortune 500 company. In the patriarchal society of 7th century China, Wu's ascent was nothing short of revolutionary. She had to navigate a labyrinth of gender norms and societal expectations, which she did with the finesse of a ninja at a cocktail party. Wu wasn't just breaking the glass ceiling. She was shattering it with a sledgehammer. Her influence expanded to the point where she was essentially running the show, with Gaozong as the figurehead. And let's be honest, he wasn't exactly the most dynamic leader. Gaozong's health issues often left him incapacitated, giving Wu ample opportunity to flex her political muscles. Speaking of power moves, let's talk about Wu's boldest declaration, making herself empress. In 655 AD, Wu Zetian took the unprecedented step of self-appointing as empress, a move that likely left the court gasping for air. Imagine the shock of the aristocracy, who probably felt like they were caught in an episode of reality TV, keeping up with the Wus, perhaps. But Wu didn't just stop there. She continued to consolidate power, maneuvering through the court with the grace of a ballet dancer and the ferocity of a lioness. Now, this might sound like the setup for a classic villain origin story, but let's not jump to conclusions. Wu's actions, though ruthless at times, were also a product of her environment. The imperial court was a shark tank, and Wu had learned to swim with the best of them. Her ambition was fueled not only by personal desire, but by a genuine belief that she was the most capable leader for the empire. And considering the alternatives, she might have been right. Fast forward to the infamous coup of 690 AD, a real-life Game of Thrones plot if there ever was one. Wu Zetian, no longer content with ruling from the shadows, declared herself Emperor of China, the first and only woman to ever do so. This was no small feat. The political landscape of the Tang dynasty was more treacherous than a minefield, and Wu navigated it with precision and poise. Her declaration wasn't just a power grab, it was a seismic shift in Chinese history. This audacious move didn't happen overnight. Wu had spent years laying the groundwork, building alliances, and eradicating opposition with the ruthlessness of a corporate takeover. She redefined the role of women in Chinese politics, proving that gender was no barrier to leadership. The coup itself was a masterclass in strategy, executed with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker proud. Wu orchestrated her rise with a blend of diplomacy, political savvy, and let's be honest, a little bit of good old-fashioned intimidation. As emperor, Wu Zetian ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Her reign was marked by significant reforms, from land redistribution to the promotion of meritocracy. She restructured the government, ensuring that talented individuals, regardless of background, could rise through the ranks. In doing so, Wu challenged the entrenched aristocracy, shaking up the status quo like a snow globe in an earthquake. Now, you might wonder how Wu managed such a feat without the modern conveniences of a PR team or social media. It's a fair question. Wu was her own spin doctor, crafting her narrative with the skill of a Hollywood publicist. She commissioned biographies and historical records that painted her in a favorable light, ensuring her legacy would endure. It was a savvy move, and one that ensured her story would be told for generations, though perhaps not always accurately. Wu Zetian's reign wasn't without controversy. Her methods could be ruthless, and her detractors were many. But love her or hate her, one thing is undeniable. Wu Zetian was a force of nature. Her impact on Chinese history is as indelible as ink on parchment, a testament to her unparalleled ambition and political acumen. As for the myths and legends that surround her, they add a layer of intrigue to an already fascinating tale. But beneath the embellishments lies the truth of a woman who defied all odds to become a ruler in a world dominated by men. Wu's story is far from over, and there's much more to explore. Her reign as emperor was just the beginning, a chapter in the epic saga of her life that would continue to unfold with as much drama and intrigue as ever. So stay tuned, because the story of Wu Zetian is one for the ages, a testament to the power of ambition, intelligence, and a little bit of strategic brilliance. And so, with Wu Zetian's ascent to the singular status of emperor, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of a game-changing era in Chinese history. That's right, folks, Wu Zetian didn't just break the mold. She shattered it, and then used the shards to craft her own empire, the Zhou dynasty. Talk about an overachiever. Wu Zetian's reign from 690 to 705 AD was like a masterclass in governance, with reforms that could make even the most seasoned modern politician take notes. Her first order of business: shake up the civil service exams, which were as revolutionary as inventing sliced bread for the bureaucracy. Now, these exams weren't your average pop quizzes. They were rigorous tests designed to find the best and brightest minds, regardless of their family connections or the size of their inheritance. If you wanted to work for the government, you had to earn it through intellect and merit, not just because you shared a family name with some noble bigwig. It was a system that promoted talent over nepotism, an idea so forward-thinking it could have been dreamt up by a Silicon Valley startup. But why stop there? Wu Zetian was all about leveling the playing field, and her land redistribution policies were a testament to that. She took lands from the wealthy aristocrats and gave them to the peasantry, a move that was less Robin Hood and more strategic genius. This not only boosted agricultural productivity, but also curbed the power of the elite, ensuring that her base of support was as wide as the empire itself. It was a bold move, akin to playing chess with live tigers instead of wooden pieces. Her land policies essentially said, checkmate to the old guard who clung to their privileges like a dog with a bone. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Wu Zetian's reputation for ruthlessness. Sure, the tales of her iron grip and cunning maneuvers could fill a season of House of Cards, but let's pump the brakes on the villain narrative for a second. While she was undoubtedly a tough cookie, many of the horror stories surrounding her reign are likely exaggerated. Take, for example, the infamous poisoned tea incident. Rumor has it Wu had rivals eliminated with a cup of deadly brew. But in reality, these tales were often spun by her political enemies, who had as much reason to smear her reputation as a tabloid magazine has to exaggerate celebrity gossip. Instead, let's focus on her knack for propaganda. a skill she wielded with the finesse of a seasoned spin doctor. Wu Zetian was a master at crafting her image, commissioning Buddhist art and texts that depicted her as a divinely chosen ruler. She even went as far as to have herself portrayed as the incarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha. This was a woman who knew the power of a good narrative long before the term branding entered the corporate lexicon. Her propaganda machine was as efficient as a Swiss watch, and it helped cement her legitimacy in a society that wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for female rulers. But Wu didn't just stop at image control. She expanded the Tang dynasty's borders with the kind of determination that would have impressed even Genghis Khan. Under her watch, the empire stretched its reach into the Korean peninsula, and she managed to keep the formidable Tibetan Empire at bay, a feat that would have left lesser leaders quaking in their silk slippers. Her diplomatic savvy wasn't just about elbowing her way onto the world stage. It was about securing her legacy as a powerhouse ruler whose influence extended well beyond the palace walls. Of course, managing an empire that large was no small feat. Wu Zetian's administration was as complex as a Rubik's Cube, and she needed all hands on deck to keep the ship afloat. To maintain control, she implemented a secret police force, ensuring she always knew what the court was whispering about her. It's a tactic that might sound draconian, but given the cutthroat nature of palace politics, it was necessary to stay one step ahead of the game. And let's be real, if you were running an empire with more moving parts than a Rube Goldberg machine, you'd want a few ears on the ground too. But let's not mistake pragmatism for paranoia. Wu's ability to balance the scales of power was nothing short of genius. She empowered women in her court, appointing them to positions of influence and authority. It was a remarkable move in a patriarchal society, and it demonstrated her commitment to challenging the status quo. Wu Zetian was not just a ruler. She was an architect of change, building a new world order that reflected her vision of meritocracy and equality. Yet, as with all great stories, Wu Zetian's reign was not without its critics. Some accused her of being a despot, while others whispered that she was too ambitious for her own good. But history is a fickle mistress, often choosing to remember the more scandalous tales over the mundane truths. The reality is, Wu Zetian was a complex figure, a ruler who wielded her power with a deft hand and an eye for the future. Her reign may have ended in 705 AD, but her legacy as a trailblazer remains etched in the annals of Chinese history. So, as we pause to catch our breath in the whirlwind that was Wu Zetian's reign, remember this. She was a woman who defied the odds, rewrote the rules, and left an indelible mark on the world. Her story is far from over, and there's still much more to uncover about the life and times of China's first, and only, female emperor. Stay tuned, because the saga of Wu Zetian is one for the ages, filled with intrigue, ambition, and a fair share of surprises. As we dive deeper into the tangled web of Wu Zetian's life, let's take a moment to unravel some of the more colorful threads, those juicy myths and legends that have stuck to her story like sequins on a Vegas showgirl. First up, the infamous human soup incident. Now, if you're picturing a cauldron bubbling away with royal rivals as the main ingredient, you're not alone. This tale is the kind of gothic horror that keeps historians up at night. Allegedly, Wu had her enemies boiled alive and served as soup. But let's hit the brakes and splash some cold water on this spicy story. The medieval Chinese court was a hotbed for rumors more explosive than a tabloid's front page. Sure, Wu's reign wasn't a garden party, but the human soup story is more likely the result of imperial exaggeration than culinary criminality. While Wu was no stranger to eliminating threats, she did, after all, live in a world where betrayal was as common as dumplings. There's scant evidence that she actually resorted to such gruesome methods. Political foes had a vested interest in painting her as a monster, much like how rival companies might spread dirt in today's corporate world. So, while her strategies might have been ruthless, they weren't necessarily marinated in blood. Now, let's shift gears to Wu's strategic genius, her use of Buddhism as a political tool, a move that would make Machiavelli proud. She positioned herself as a divine ruler. Wu didn't just dip her toes into the spiritual pool. She dived in head first, commissioning grandiose Buddhist art and texts to bolster her legitimacy. It was akin to a modern-day CEO launching a savvy PR campaign to woo investors. By aligning herself with Buddhism, Wu Zetian claimed the mandate of heaven, a concept that basically said, "The gods are on my side, so back off." Her tactic was brilliant not just for its spiritual veneer, but for its socio-political leverage. In a time when China was a patchwork quilt of beliefs and traditions, Buddhism offered a unifying thread. Wu's patronage of the religion wasn't just about divine endorsement. It was about consolidating power in a fractured society. It was like finding the ultimate power tie that matched every suit in the imperial wardrobe. But let's not forget the double-edged sword of gender dynamics. Wu Zetian was treading a path as treacherous as it was unprecedented. In a society where women were expected to be as docile as the porcelain figurines on their shelves, Wu was a hurricane in human form. Her rise to power challenged the very fabric of societal norms, leaving historians both impressed and scandalized. She wasn't just a woman in a man's world. She was a woman rewriting the rules of the game. To say Wu Zetian faced pushback is like saying the Great Wall is a quaint little fence. She was up against centuries of entrenched gender roles, and she bulldozed through them with the determination of a steam-powered locomotive. Critics labeled her as power-hungry and cruel, but let's call a spade a spade. Wu played the same game as her male counterparts, only better. Her story is a masterclass in defying expectations, a narrative that proves ambition doesn't have a gender. As we sift through the myths, one thing becomes clear. Wu Zetian was as much a product of her environment as she was an architect of her destiny. Her time on the throne wasn't just about maintaining power, it was about transforming it. She dared to be more than a figurehead, challenging the stereotypes of her time with a ferocity that would make a lioness proud. Yet, despite her groundbreaking achievements, Wu's legacy remains a mixed bag of admiration and vilification. It's a testament to the enduring power of narrative that even today, her story is still being pieced together, one myth at a time. So as we continue to explore the life of China's only female emperor, remember this: history is messy, but it's in that messiness that we find the most compelling truths. And Wu Zetian's reign is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most scandalous stories are the ones worth telling. Stay tuned, because the saga of Wu Zetian is far from over. Whether she's a hero, a villain, or something in between, one thing is certain. Her story is one for the ages, filled with intrigue, ambition, and enough drama to fill an imperial palace. And so, the curtain falls on Wu Zetian's reign. But as with any good drama, the final act is both riveting and a little bittersweet. By 705 AD, Wu's political roller coaster was nearing its inevitable drop. With the vigor of her youth fading and palace intrigue reaching a fever pitch, the stage was set for an exit less graceful than her entrance. You see, ruling an empire, even one you've meticulously crafted, is like juggling flaming swords, thrilling, but one slip and it's all over. Wu's age and health were catching up with her. By then, she was in her 80s, an impressive feat considering the life expectancy of the time hovered around 30 to 40 years. Yet, the palace was no place for a peaceful retirement. Her waning strength invited political vultures to circle. One could argue she was a victim of her own success. After all, she'd spent decades teaching her court the art of ambition, and now her proteges were putting those lessons to use. Enter the Zhang brothers, Wu's young and charismatic favorites who, let's be honest, were as much a political liability as they were companions. Their influence over the Empress alarmed court officials who were already wary of Wu's unconventional ways. It was the perfect storm of scandal and politics, the kind that could make even the most seasoned reality TV producer salivate. The brothers' sway over Wu was seen as a threat, and their lavish lifestyles didn't exactly help their case. It wasn't long before whispers turned to action. The coup of 705 AD was less a dramatic siege and more an office takeover. Wu's own ministers, tired of the Zhang brothers' antics and eager to return to Tang rule, orchestrated her abdication. Imagine a board meeting where the CEO is gently persuaded to explore other opportunities, except replace boardroom politeness with imperial scheming. Wu was forced to step down in favor of her son, Zhangzong, marking the end of her reign and the restoration of the Tang dynasty. But let's not just focus on the dramatic exit. Wu Zetian's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of innovation, controversy, and undeniable impact. Her reign was a turning point for the Tang dynasty, with reforms that reverberated through the ages. She made the civil service exams a cornerstone of governance, a move that democratized the bureaucracy and ensured talent rose above the noise. It was a meritocratic dream, a vision of governance that valued brains over birthright. Yet Wu's story is as much about perception as it is about policy. For centuries, historians have debated whether she was a power-hungry tyrant or a visionary leader. The truth, as with most things, is somewhere in the middle. Wu played the Game of Thrones with a finesse that few could match. And yes, her methods were sometimes as sharp as a double-edged sword. But in a world where male rulers were often praised for similar strategies, Wu was simply playing by the rules of her time, rules she helped rewrite. Economically, Wu's policies bolstered the empire's stability. Her land reforms, while controversial, redistributed wealth and curbed the power of the aristocracy, fostering a more balanced society. This wasn't just about altruism, it was strategic. By empowering the peasantry, Wu secured a loyal base that was crucial for her governance. It's a lesson in politics as relevant today as it was over a millennium ago. Keep your people content, and they'll keep you in power. But what of the myths? Those tantalizing tales that paint Wu as a villainess straight out of a Gothic novel. They're as enduring as they are entertaining, yet they often overshadow her genuine contributions. Stories of her alleged cruelties, like the infamous human soup, are more fiction than fact, likely the work of later Confucian scholars who were scandalized by her audacity and gender. In reality, Wu's life was a blend of ambition, intellect, and a touch of Machiavellian maneuvering that would leave even the most cunning strategist in awe. Her reign challenged the status quo, proving that leadership knows no gender. She was a woman who dared to defy societal norms, a ruler who carved her name into the annals of history with a flourish as bold as her policies. So, as we wrap up the saga of Wu Zetian, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of her legacy. She was a trailblazer in the truest sense, a leader whose story is one of defying odds, challenging norms, and leaving an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. Her life invites us to ponder what it truly takes to rule with authority, intelligence, and yes, a bit of audacity. As the dust settled on Wu Zetian's reign, the echoes of her influence continue to resonate throughout Chinese history. Her story serves as a reminder that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of motives, actions, and outcomes. Wu's legacy, like her life, is a testament to the power of ambition, the complexity of leadership, and the enduring allure of a story well told. So here's to Wu Zetian, the empress who dared to dream beyond the confines of her era, reminding us that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that challenge us to think differently. Her tale is one for the ages, a blend of romance and reality, and a narrative that continues to captivate and confound. As we close this chapter, remember, history may be written by the victors, but it's the stories of those who defied the odds that truly endure. As the sun creeps over the horizon, casting a golden hue on the ziggurats of you're already in the thick of it. Your day in ancient Mesopotamia kicks off with a jolt, because crafting here is as vital as your morning espresso shot in modern times. Before you even think of grabbing breakfast, your mind is already buzzing with thoughts of clay and cuneiform. Welcome to a world where your hands are your passport to creation and commerce. First stop, the bustling markets of a city that could give your local farmers market a run for its money. It's not just a place to pick up a few veggies, but a vibrant hub of economic and social activity. Craftsmen and traders shout over each other, hawking their wares like they're auctioning off the last slice of pizza at a Super Bowl party. Here, artisans are the rock stars, and their tools of the trade, clay, reeds, and pigments, are the instruments of their fame. Now, let's talk clay tablets. Forget about your fancy touchscreen tablets. These bad boys are the real OGs. Made from the very earth you walk on, they were the backbone of Mesopotamian economics. Sumerians used them to record everything from grain inventories to epic tales of gods and heroes. Each tablet, roughly the size of a postcard, was a treasure trove of information. In a world where literacy was as rare as a solar eclipse, these tablets were power. Crafting a clay tablet wasn't just a matter of scribbling things down. It was a precise art form, demanding patience and a steady hand. Artisans inscribed them with cuneiform, the script that looks like a bunch of triangles and lines having a party on a piece of clay. It was a writing system born out of necessity, evolving from simple pictographs to an elaborate system of over 600 symbols. It's like going from stick figures to the Mona Lisa in a couple of centuries. Let's pause here to mythbust a bit. While it sounds romantic to think of these scribes as wise old men with flowing beards and ink-stained fingers, the reality was a bit grittier. Scribes were highly trained professionals, sure, but they worked in cramped, noisy workshops, often crammed with apprentices learning the ropes. And let's not forget, they were usually at the mercy of the guy with the gold, literally. Patronage from wealthy merchants or temple officials was crucial. No gigs, no food on the table. Bartering was the name of the game here. Coins, those are still a twinkle in the economic future's eye. Instead, you get to haggle like a pro. Your finely crafted clay tablets or woven textiles might be worth a few baskets of barley or a couple of goats, depending on the season. It's a bit like trading baseball cards, but with a lot more riding on the outcome, namely, your next meal. Artisans held a crucial role in this barter economy. They were the unsung heroes, the silent engines of progress. In a society where your social standing was as rigid as a clay tablet, skilled craftsmen could carve out a niche for themselves. But make no mistake, this wasn't a land of equal opportunity. Your success often depended as much on your connections and luck as on your skill with a stylus or loom. As the day wears on, the relentless Mesopotamian sun beats down, but the market doesn't lose its buzz. You wander past stalls overflowing with intricate jewelry, vibrant textiles, and clay parts of every shape and size. You can't help but marvel at the sheer variety and craftsmanship on display. Each item tells a story of hours spent hunched over a workbench, of trial and error, and sometimes of sheer frustration. But let's not romanticize it too much. Crafting was hard, back-breaking work. The materials were basic: clay dug from the riverbank, reeds cut from the marshes, and pigments made from crushed minerals. Tools were simple, often handmade, and the techniques passed down through generations. Yet, despite the limitations, or maybe because of them, the artisans of Mesopotamia created objects of stunning beauty and practicality. As the sun starts to dip, painting the city in shades of amber and crimson, you reflect on the day's lessons. You've seen the thriving heart of an ancient economy where crafting was both an art and a necessity. You've glimpsed the lives of the artisans, whose hands shaped the world as surely as any king or conqueror. And you've understood the power of clay tablets and cuneiform in a society where knowledge was literally etched in stone. It's been a whirlwind day in ancient Mesopotamia, where the past feels as immediate as the present. As you head back to your dwelling, the sounds of the market still ringing in your ears, you can't help but feel a deep respect for the craftsmen and scribes who laid the foundations of civilization, one clay tablet at a time. As you leave the clay-scented chaos of the market behind, the midday sun casts its relentless glow across the dusty streets of Ur, setting the stage for another key player in Mesopotamian life: textile production. Welcome to the world of ancient, fast fashion, or at least as fast as you can get when everything is done by hand. Let's start with wool, more than just a cozy sweater material. Mesopotamians prized their wool, and not just for keeping warm during those chilly desert nights. Wool was the backbone of the textile industry, a status symbol that doubled as a currency. Think of it as the Bitcoin of the Bronze Age, only less volatile and a lot itchier. Now, you might be wondering, how did they transform all that sheep fluff into a wearable masterpiece? Brace yourself for a process that makes your laundry day look like a walk in the park. First, you've got to shear the sheep, a task likely to leave you covered in lanolin and cursing under your breath. Once you've wrestled the fleece from its bewildered donor, it's time for some serious prep work. The wool had to be washed, carded, and spun, a process as tedious as untangling a pair of wired headphones, but on an industrial scale. And don't even get me started on flax. Harvesting flax for linen was no less laborious, requiring a combination of green thumbs and brute strength. The stalks had to be soaked, beaten, and combed until they surrendered their fibers. Imagine trying to extract gold from straw, and you've got the right idea. Once the fibers were ready, they were woven into textiles using looms that were about as user-friendly as your average IKEA instruction manual. Weavers, often women, worked tirelessly to produce cloth that was not only functional, but also beautifully patterned. It's a bit like quilting, but instead of a hobby, it was a full-time job that kept the lights on, or more accurately, the oil lamps burning. Speaking of women, here's a myth worth busting. Despite the macho image of ancient societies, women were the true powerhouses of the textile industry. They were the ones spinning, weaving, and dyeing, often while managing households and raising children. Forget the image of the demure lady of the house. Mesopotamian women were the original multitaskers, seamlessly blending domestic life with economic contribution. Take that, modern-day work-life balance. Textiles weren't just about keeping the Mesopotamian elite draped in the latest styles. They were a key element in the barter economy. A bolt of linen could secure a deal as easily as a handshake, and high-quality textiles were traded across vast distances, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Picture a trade network as complex as the modern stock exchange, but with fewer graphs and more camels. Economic context here is vital. Mesopotamian textiles were so valuable that they became a cornerstone of international trade, fueling interactions with distant lands and cultures. This wasn't just about fashion. It was about power, diplomacy, and survival. A well-placed piece of cloth could open doors, seal alliances, and even save a kingdom from ruin. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing the life of a Mesopotamian weaver. The reality was far from glamorous, with long hours spent hunched over looms in dimly lit rooms. The work was physically demanding, often leaving the women with calloused hands and aching backs. And yet, in a society where women's contributions were often overshadowed by their male counterparts, the textile industry offered a rare opportunity for agency and influence. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows over the city, you've got to admit, there's something awe-inspiring about this ancient world buzzing with creativity and commerce. The Mesopotamians may not have had Instagram to flaunt their creations, but their textiles spoke volumes, weaving stories of innovation, endurance, and the indomitable human spirit. So as you wander back through the bustling streets, keep an eye out for those vibrant fabrics fluttering in the breeze, each one a testament to the skill, sweat, and savvy of the Mesopotamian weavers. It's a whirlwind of history, economics, and culture, all wrapped up in a length of cloth. As the day draws to a close, the story of Mesopotamian crafting is far from over. There's still more to unravel in the next chapter of this ancient tale. As the vibrant fabrics fade from view, you're about to dive into the gritty, red-hot world of Mesopotamian metalwork and pottery. Get ready to be impressed by the artistry and tenacity of craftsmen who, without the help of modern machinery, transformed raw metal and clay into objects of both utility and beauty. These artisans didn't just shape materials, they shaped society. Let's start with the metal workers, the unsung heroes who wielded fire and metal like a rock star handles a guitar. Picture this, a sweltering workshop, the air thick with the tang of molten metal. Bronze and copper were the headliners in this show, with iron still waiting in the wings for its big debut. Bronze, that superstar alloy of copper and tin, was the material of choice for weapons, tools, and even mirrors. Basically, anything that needed to withstand the test of time and use. The Mesopotamians were among the first to unlock the secrets of bronze around 3300 BC, giving them a distinct edge, quite literally, in warfare and agriculture. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a scene from a fantasy novel, hold up. The reality was less about magic and more about sweat and skill. Imagine trying to smelt ore in a world where the closest thing to safety goggles was a squint. The process required precision and a keen understanding of temperature control, not to mention a willingness to be on a first-name basis with fire. The bellows had to be pumped just right to maintain the heat, and one slip could mean a day's work, or worse, up in smoke. But what's fascinating is how this metalwork wasn't just about crafting tools and weapons. It literally forged the Mesopotamian economic and social structures. Tools made from bronze and copper improved agricultural efficiency, which in turn boosted food production and freed up time for other pursuits, like building those iconic ziggurats. And when it came to warfare, the edge bronze weapons provided could mean the difference between victory and defeat, between expansion and obliteration. In a world where survival was a constant contest, metalworkers were the silent strategists, arming society with the means to thrive. Switch gears, and let's talk pottery, the Tupperware of the ancient world. These parts were the unsung workhorses of Mesopotamian life, used to store everything from grain to oil, wine, and water. In a landscape where preserving goods was as crucial as producing them, pottery was indispensable. The Mesopotamians were pioneers in pottery, mastering techniques that turned humble clay into a versatile and durable material. Their pottery wasn't just functional, it was often beautifully decorated, telling stories and showcasing artistic flair. But here's where we bust a myth. It wasn't all delicate vases and ornate designs. The bulk of Mesopotamian pottery was straightforward and utilitarian. Think of it as the IKEA of ancient housewares, practical, affordable, and everywhere. The potter's wheel, introduced around 4000 BC, revolutionized the craft, allowing for more uniform pieces and quicker production. It's a bit like the assembly line before Henry Ford made it cool. Crafting pottery required not just artistic skill, but also a keen understanding of chemistry. The clay needed to be just right, with the perfect balance of silt and sand. Once shaped, parts were fired in kilns that could reach temperatures upwards of 1000 degrees Celsius, a feat of engineering that's impressive even by today's standards. And let's not forget glazing, an innovation that added both beauty and functionality by making parts watertight. Now, why does any of this matter beyond the fact that it's fascinating? Because these crafts were the backbone of Mesopotamian civilization, influencing everything from diet to trade to social hierarchy. The ability to produce and store surplus food, thanks to pottery, allowed societies to grow and flourish. Meanwhile, metal tools and weapons facilitated both the construction of complex infrastructures and the defense of burgeoning city-states. These crafts weren't just about creating objects, they were about crafting a civilization. Speaking of society, let's peel back the curtain on the craftsmen themselves. In a world where social mobility was as rare as a rainstorm in the desert, skilled craftsmen held a unique position. They were respected for their expertise, their work commissioned by kings and temple officials. But let's not sugarcoat it. While they might have enjoyed a certain status, they weren't exactly living in the lap of luxury. Their lives were dictated by the demands of their patrons and the whims of economic tides. And while they may have been celebrated in life, their legacy often depended on the durability of their creations, not the stories of their lives. In Mesopotamian architecture, the influence of metalwork and pottery was profound. Metal tools enabled the construction of monumental structures, while pottery provided essential storage solutions that supported urban growth. The ziggurats that dominated city skylines were as much a testament to the metalworkers and potters as to the kings who commissioned them. In essence, craftsmen were the architects of civilization, their work underpinning the very fabric of daily life. As the afternoon wanes, casting long shadows across the streets, you can't help but feel a newfound appreciation for the artisans who, with nothing more than raw materials and sheer determination, helped build the very foundations of society. These craftsmen, with their fire-forged tools and clay creations, were the unsung architects of a world that was just beginning to understand its potential. So, as the sun sinks lower, draping the city in a golden glow, you realize that the story of Mesopotamian craftsmanship is far from over. There's still so much more to uncover about this ancient civilization, where every object tells a tale of innovation, resilience, and the relentless human drive to create. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more intriguing revelations from the cradle of civilization. As the sun dips below the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of purples and oranges, you find yourself in the heart of ancient Mesopotamia's spiritual life. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the echo of distant chants. You've wandered into a world where crafting wasn't just about survival or commerce. It was a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Now, let's talk ziggurats, those massive multi-tiered structures that put your local skyscraper to shame. They weren't just architectural show-offs. They were spiritual beacons, drawing the eye and the soul upward. And who do you think was responsible for decorating these colossal stairways to heaven? That's right, our hard-working craftsmen. Artisans toiled over intricate carvings, ornate sculptures, and lavish tapestries, each piece a labor of devotion aimed at pleasing the gods and securing a little divine favor. See, in Mesopotamia, the gods were as much a part of daily life as taxes and clay tablets. They were believed to control everything from harvests to floods. So, crafting offerings and temple furnishings wasn't just a job, it was a sacred duty. A well-crafted idol or a beautifully inscribed tablet could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a season of famine. No pressure, right? But let's not get too swept away by the romantic notion of the artisan as a divine conduit. While some craftsmen might have been viewed as semi-mystical figures, most were just trying to make a living. They worked in workshops that were as bustling as any modern-day factory floor, often under the watchful eyes of temple officials who had their own ideas about what the gods might fancy. Here's the kicker. Despite the grandeur of their creations, most artisans lived modestly, while the priests and ruling elite enjoyed the fruits of their labor, both spiritual and material. The craftsmen themselves often remained in the background, their names lost to history. It's a bit like the modern film industry. The actors and directors get the Oscars, while the folks who actually built the sets and crafted the props get a nod during the credits. But let's peel back another layer of this ancient onion. These craftsmen weren't just churning out religious paraphernalia. They were infusing each piece with a story, a purpose. Take ceremonial vases, for instance. These weren't just water jugs. They were masterpieces, engraved with scenes from mythology or inscribed with prayers. They were the ancient equivalent of a multi-purpose tool, part sacred object, part artistic expression. And let's not forget the myths surrounding the artisans themselves. Were they revered artists or just glorified laborers? The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the murky middle. Skilled artisans were respected for their craft, but they were also at the mercy of the temple economy. They lived in a world where the lines between art and utility, spirituality and commerce were as blurred as the Mesopotamian horizon after a sandstorm. Of course, the cultural significance of crafting extended beyond the temple walls. In a society where written records were still a luxury, art was a form of communication, a way to pass down stories, beliefs, and even laws. The artisan's work was a visual language that transcended the barriers of literacy and time. Every carved relief, every painted mural was a chapter in the sprawling epic of Mesopotamian civilization. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the bull in the room. You've probably heard the tale of the Bull of Heaven from the Epic of Gilgamesh. This mythic creature was said to have been crafted by the gods themselves, a divine beast unleashed upon the world. But here's where it gets interesting. The imagery of the bull wasn't just mythic fluff. Bulls were central to the Mesopotamian economy and symbolized strength and fertility. Depictions of bulls in art weren't just decorative. They were deeply symbolic, reflecting both the fears and aspirations of a society at the mercy of nature. So, as you watch the city of Ur transform under the twilight, you realize that the story of Mesopotamian crafting is as layered as the ziggurats themselves. It's about survival and spirituality, art and economics. It's a story of craftsmen who, through their creations, connected the mundane with the mystical, leaving an indelible mark on history, one chisel stroke at a time. And as you ponder the myths and realities of these ancient artisans, you can't help but wonder about the next chapter. What other secrets lie hidden in the shadows of this ancient world, waiting to be uncovered by the flickering light of a Mesopotamian oil lamp? Stay tuned, because the tale of crafting in Mesopotamia is far from finished. There's still a world of wonder to explore, where every artifact holds a story and every craftsman a mystery. And speaking of mysteries, let's unravel the legacy of Mesopotamian craftsmanship, a legacy that stretches across time like the shadow of a ziggurat at sunset. It's easy to get lost in the romance of ancient artisans, imagining them as mystical figures, channeling divine inspiration into every clay pot and bronze blade. But let's get real. These were hardworking folks, not unlike today's artists and craftsmen, trying to make a living while leaving a mark on the world. First, let's talk influence. Mesopotamian craftsmanship didn't just evaporate like a puddle under the desert sun. Oh no, it left a footprint the size of a giant's sandal on the pages of history. Take writing, for instance. The cuneiform script, those enigmatic triangles and lines, laid the groundwork for future writing systems across the ancient world. It's like the great-grandparent of your keyboard emoji collection. By the time the Assyrians were writing their chronicles in the 7th century BC, cuneiform had already morphed into a complex script that influenced languages as far afield as ancient Persia, and even contributed to the development of the Hebrew and Greek alphabets. Talk about having a typeface with staying power. But it wasn't just writing that left a mark. Those Mesopotamian textiles we chatted about, they weren't just about keeping folks warm. They were the first stepping stones on the path to global trade networks. By 2000 BC, Mesopotamian textiles were being exchanged across vast distances, reaching Egypt, the Indus Valley, and possibly even as far as the Aegean. Imagine today's fashion influencers, but their runways were dusty trade routes, and their audience included everyone from Egyptian pharaohs to Indus Valley merchants. The demand for Mesopotamian wool and linen helped establish some of the earliest international trade relations, paving the way for the Silk Road and other trade networks that would follow. Now, if you think pottery was just a bunch of broken shards in an archaeologist's daydream, think again. Mesopotamian pottery techniques, especially the use of the potter's wheel, spread across the Near East like wildfire. By 3000 BC, the potter's wheel had revolutionized pottery making from Egypt to the Indus Valley, allowing for mass production and standardization. This wasn't just about making more parts faster. It was about creating a consistent product that could be traded or stored with ease. It's like moving from one-off hand-thrown mugs to IKEA's identically perfect sets, efficient and versatile. And speaking of efficiency, let's not forget the metalwork. The Mesopotamians were pioneers of metallurgy, with bronze being their metal of choice around 3300 BC. This wasn't just about making cool swords and plows, though those were certainly on the menu. Bronze tools and weapons were a game changer for agriculture and military might, giving rise to more advanced societies and centralized states. The techniques perfected by Mesopotamian metalworkers laid the groundwork for the Iron Age, which would eventually lead to the industrial revolutions of later centuries. It's a bit like going from the Model T Ford to a Tesla with a few millennia in between. But enough about the ripple effect. Let's debunk a few myths before we wrap up. The romantic notion of the lone artisan, chisel in hand, shaping history one stroke at a time, is just that, romantic. The reality was a bit more corporate. Artisans worked in bustling workshops, often under the thumb of powerful patrons. The glory belonged to kings and priests, while the craftsmen remained unsung heroes, their names lost to time even as their creations endured. And let's face it, life wasn't all clay tablets and ceremonial vases. Crafting was hard work, and while skilled artisans might gain some respect, they weren't exactly swimming in luxury. They lived in a stratified society, where your birth often dictated your life's trajectory more than talent or hard work ever could. The best most could hope for was a steady gig and enough to eat. It was survival, not a showcase. Yet, despite these harsh realities, the legacy of Mesopotamian craftsmanship is undeniable. It's a testament to human ingenuity, the drive to create something lasting in a world where nothing is guaranteed. In every clay tablet and woven textile, there's a story of resilience and innovation. Mesopotamian craftsmen left behind more than just artifacts. They left a blueprint for civilization itself. So where does this leave us, modern descendants of these ancient artists? We're part of a long, unbroken lineage of creators, whether we're coding apps, designing clothes, or building skyscrapers. Every time you pick up a pen or brush, remember that you're stepping into a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. It's a legacy of skill, perseverance, and the simple human desire to make something beautiful and useful. As you ponder these ancient echoes, remember that the story of Mesopotamian craftsmanship isn't just about the past. It's a living tale, woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. So next time you sip from a ceramic mug or jot down a note on paper, spare a thought for those early artisans. They didn't just craft objects, they crafted the world as we know it, one clay tablet at a time. And that, dear listener, is a legacy worth celebrating. In the grand tapestry of history, where blood-soaked warriors typically got all the spotlight, Ashurbanipal was the oddball who preferred a good book to a sharp sword. Born around 685 BCE, Ashurbanipal was the last great king of the Assyrian Empire, and boy, did he have a flair for the unconventional. Imagine a guy who could outsmart generals with his scholarly know-how while wearing a crown that could double as a helmet. His early life was a cocktail of contradictions, a scholarly prince in a kingdom where flexing your muscles was the national pastime. Now, to understand how Ashurbanipal became the ancient world's ultimate nerd-in-chief, we need to take a peek at his early years. Unlike his warrior predecessors, who probably wrestled with lions before breakfast, young Ashurbanipal was curled up with clay tablets, learning everything from mathematics to astrology. His father, Esarhaddon, was the reigning king, and he must have seen some spark in Ashurbanipal, deciding to give him an education that was more library card than battle axe. This royal education wasn't just for show. Ashurbanipal devoured knowledge like a kid in a candy store, and his tutors must have had their work cut out for them. The future king was trained in reading and writing cuneiform, the ancient equivalent of learning to code in a language that looks like a cross between tic-tac-toe and a game of Tetris. And let's not forget his fluency in Akkadian, Aramaic, Sumerian, and Elamite, because why stop at just one dead language? By the time he was a young adult, Ashurbanipal was a walking, talking Wikipedia of the ancient Near East. But here's where the plot thickens. Ashurbanipal wasn't just a bookworm hiding in the basement of the royal palace. He was also being groomed for leadership, a role that traditionally involved more sword swinging than scroll reading. Picture a young prince who could debate the merits of a good poem about the gods just as easily as he could strategize a military campaign. His training was a balancing act, with one foot in the world of the intellect and the other in the gritty business of empire management. By 668 BCE, when Ashurbanipal's father Esarhaddon died, the young prince was ready to take the reins. But like any good drama, the transition of power had its backstage chaos. In a kingdom where treachery was as common as sand, succession could be a deadly game. But Ashurbanipal navigated the political labyrinth with the same precision he applied to his studies. He was officially crowned king in Nineveh, the glittering capital of Assyria, and the rest of the world probably wondered how a guy who preferred papyrus to pikes would handle an empire infamous for its military brutality. His reign, starting in 668 BCE, was a masterclass in handling contradictions. For a kingdom that prided itself on its military conquests, Ashurbanipal was a ruler who waged war with wisdom as his weapon. Sure, he led campaigns and expanded his territories. He wasn't about to let the Assyrian army rust. But he also understood that an empire is built on more than just brute force. His leadership was a blend of diplomacy, intelligence, and yes, the occasional show of might when necessary. In the grand halls of Nineveh, Ashurbanipal's court was a mix of scholars and soldiers, a juxtaposition that would have made any modern-day manager scratch their head in confusion. But Ashurbanipal wasn't just any ruler. He was a king who knew that knowledge was power. He surrounded himself with advisors who could speak the languages of both war and peace, people who could advise him on everything from military tactics to agricultural improvements. This was a king who understood that an empire wasn't just built on the bones of its enemies, but on the backs of its farmers, the minds of its scholars, and the skills of its craftsmen. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. You see, ruling over one of the most powerful empires in history wasn't just about throwing the best banquets or having the most lavish palaces. It was about managing a delicate balance of internal and external threats, keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. Ashurbanipal had to deal with rebellious governors, ambitious brothers, and a slew of external foes who would have loved to see Assyria's downfall. And yet, through it all, maintained his grip on power, proving that you could be both a scholar and a king, a thinker and a doer. In a world where military prowess was often the measure of a man, Ashurbanipal stood out as a testament to the power of intellect. He showed that it was possible to wield a pen with as much impact as a sword, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the library. As we delve deeper into his life, remember this. Ashurbanipal wasn't just a king. He was a pioneer, a ruler who dared to think differently, and in doing so, left a legacy that would echo through the ages. If you thought the Assyrian Empire was all about chariots and conquests, think again. Ashurbanipal's reign was where academia met Armageddon, with his library standing as the ultimate mic drop in the annals of ancient history. Imagine this. A king who stockpiled knowledge like his neighbors hoarded chariots. The library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh was no ordinary collection of clay tablets. It was the ancient world's version of Google, except with a lot more clay and a bit less color. Now, Ashurbanipal's library wasn't just about collecting dusty old tablets to impress ancient hipsters. This was a strategic move. In a time when most kings were busy flexing their military muscles, Ashurbanipal was building a different kind of fortress, one made of words and wisdom. The library housed over 30,000 tablets, covering everything from epic poetry to medical treatises. If you wanted to know how to interpret an ominous sheep liver or needed the latest on Babylonian astrology, Ashurbanipal had you covered. But let's not sugarcoat this. Running a library in ancient Assyria wasn't just about dusting shelves and shushing noisy scribes. In a kingdom where conquest was king, Ashurbanipal's scribes might have deserved hazard pay. Scribing wasn't exactly a glamorous gig. It was painstaking and tedious, like trying to transcribe the entire internet by hand. And the economic implications? Well, while the rest of the empire was pouring resources into warfare, Ashurbanipal diverted a slice of the state budget to fund his literary obsession. This was a ruler who believed that capturing cities was great, but capturing knowledge was even better. Imagine the scene at the royal court. Generals discussing the logistics of siege warfare in one corner, while a group of scribes debated the finer points of cuneiform grammar in another. You might think this was a recipe for chaos, but Ashurbanipal saw it as a way to outmaneuver his foes. Knowledge was a weapon, and Ashurbanipal wielded it with the precision of a surgeon. His library wasn't just a monument to his intellectual vanity. It was a tool of statecraft. Now, let's talk legacy. Did Ashurbanipal set out to become the godfather of librarians? Probably not. But when you amass a collection that makes the Library of Alexandria look like a bookmobile, people take notice. This wasn't just the first great library of the ancient world. It was a beacon of learning that would influence future generations. Centuries later, when archaeologists dusted off the sands of Nineveh, they uncovered this treasure trove of ancient wisdom, ensuring Ashurbanipal's name echoed through the annals of history long after his empire crumbled. This leads us to the myth-busting part. While it's tempting to picture Ashurbanipal as the original bookworm king, let's not forget that he was also the last great ruler of a notoriously brutal empire. The Assyrians didn't exactly have a reputation for playing nice, and Ashurbanipal was no exception. His library may have been a sanctuary of knowledge, but his policies were often enacted with the same iron fist as his predecessors. This is a classic case of duality in leadership. The pen may have been mightier than the sword, but Ashurbanipal knew how to wield both with ruthless efficiency. Economically, his reign was a balancing act. While the library was a cultural boon, it didn't come cheap. Resources that could have been used to bolster the military or improve infrastructure were funneled into acquiring and maintaining this vast collection. It was a gamble, one that paid off in terms of cultural prestige, but may have strained the empire's coffers. Who needs a fortified wall when you can have a wall of words? Right. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Ashurbanipal's legacy is how it highlights the power of knowledge in governance. In a world where might made right, Ashurbanipal's library was a testament to the enduring value of intellectual capital. It was a statement that empires could be built not just on the battlefield, but also in the quiet corridors of thought and study. As we ponder the significance of Ashurbanipal's obsession with books over battles, it's clear that this was a king who understood the true value of knowledge, its ability to preserve, to influence, and to transcend the temporal bounds of power. It's this legacy that turns Ashurbanipal from a mere footnote in history into a figure of profound importance, a reminder that sometimes the greatest conquests are those fought with ideas rather than armies. And so, as we leave the dusty halls of Ashurbanipal's library, we see a ruler who was both a product of his time and a visionary ahead of it. While his empire may have fallen, the echoes of his intellectual pursuits continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of the written word. But don't close the book just yet. There's more to Ashurbanipal's story, so stay tuned as we delve further into the life of this extraordinary king, where the past meets the present in a narrative as rich and complex as the man himself. As we leave the dusty halls of Ashurbanipal's library, let's take a detour to the not-so-glamorous side of his reign, his military campaigns. You know, those pesky little things that kings had to do to keep their empires from crumbling like stale bread. For Ashurbanipal, this meant stepping away from his beloved clay tablets and into the muddy boots of ancient warfare. And let's be honest, his attempts at conquest were a bit of a mixed bag. Enter the Elamite campaign, the ancient equivalent of a Hollywood blockbuster with a budget that could make your eyes water. Picture this. Ashurbanipal, the Scholar King, deciding to flex his military muscle against the Elamites, a neighboring kingdom whose rulers had a nasty habit of poking the Assyrian bear. The year was 647 BCE, and Ashurbanipal was determined to teach these pesky neighbors a lesson they wouldn't forget. But much like a summer blockbuster that spends more on special effects than on script writing, the campaign was long on spectacle and short on substance. First off, let's talk logistics. Ashurbanipal's campaign against Elam was a massive undertaking. We're talking about an army that could rival the population of a small city, complete with chariots, infantry, and enough supplies to feed a small nation. The costs, astronomical. If you think modern military budgets are hefty, just imagine pouring resources into a campaign with no guarantees of success. Ashurbanipal funneled vast sums from the empire's coffers, and the economic strain was akin to asking your accountant to fund a moon landing with a lemonade stand. Now, you might wonder why Ashurbanipal was so keen on Elam. Was it the allure of glory, a thirst for revenge, or simply the desire to write a new chapter in Assyrian history? The truth is probably a cocktail of all three. Elam had been a thorn in Assyria's side for decades, and Ashurbanipal wanted to ensure his name was etched into the annals of history as the king who finally subdued this rebellious neighbor. But oh, the irony. Here was a king who could recite poetry in multiple languages, struggling to keep his military campaigns from turning into epic failures. The Elamite campaign was a comedy of errors, with Ashurbanipal juggling his scholarly pursuits alongside battlefield blunders. Imagine trying to decipher the latest astronomical treatise while your generals are outside your tent, arguing about the best way to cross a swollen river. Not exactly a recipe for success. The campaign was riddled with setbacks, unpredictable weather, rebellious vassals, and supply chain issues that would make a logistics manager weep. All played their part in turning Ashurbanipal's grand plans into a logistical nightmare. And let's not forget the PR disasters. For every victory Ashurbanipal managed to scrape together, there was a defeat lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce on his reputation like a hungry lion on an unsuspecting gazelle. Take, for instance, the infamous Battle of Ulai. Ashurbanipal's forces clashed with the Elamites near the Ulai River, and while the Assyrians eventually claimed victory, it was a Pyrrhic one at best. Casualties were high, and the spoils of war were far less than anticipated. It was the kind of victory that made you wonder if the game was worth the candle, a sentiment that undoubtedly echoed through the corridors of Nineveh as the king returned home with fewer laurels than planned. Yet, for all its hiccups, the Elamite campaign did achieve some of its objectives. Ashurbanipal managed to sack the Elamite capital of Susa, a symbolic victory that offered a temporary balm to his bruised ego. But the victory came at a cost that was more than just economic. The campaign left a trail of destruction that did little to endear the Assyrians to their neighbors, and the long-term gain was questionable at best. Back home, Ashurbanipal was left to spin these events into a narrative that wouldn't tarnish his scholarly image. After all, no king wants to be remembered as the ruler whose military blunders overshadowed his intellectual achievements. In classic PR fashion, the scribes of Nineveh got to work, crafting accounts that highlighted the conquests while downplaying the defeats. It was a tale as old as time, victories celebrated, failures quietly swept under the royal rug. But beneath the surface of these grand tales lay the harsh realities of empire building. Ashurbanipal's campaigns revealed the delicate balance between the pursuit of knowledge and the demands of power. For all his intellectual prowess, the king was not immune to the pitfalls of military ambition. He learned the hard way that expanding an empire was not just about winning battles, but also about securing peace, a lesson that modern leaders would do well to remember. As we navigate the tangled web of Ashurbanipal's military endeavors, it's clear that his reign was a complex tapestry of triumphs and tribulations. The Elamite campaign, with its mix of high stakes and low returns, stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of power. It reminds us that even the most brilliant minds can falter when confronted with the chaos of war. So, as we leave the battlefields of Elam behind, let's keep this in mind. Ashurbanipal's story is far from over. The last great king of Assyria still has more chapters to unfold, more lessons to impart. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the legacy of this remarkable ruler, where the lines between legend and reality blur, and the echoes of history continue to resonate. As we leave the battlefields of Elam behind, we're not trading swords for scrolls just yet. Nope, we're diving headfirst into the family drama of the century, starring Ashurbanipal and his brother Shamash Shamukin. If you think your holiday dinners get tense, just wait until you hear about this royal rumble. Let's set the stage. It's the mid-7th century BCE, and the Assyrian Empire is at its zenith. Ashurbanipal, sitting pretty on the throne in Nineveh, is the undisputed king of intellect and might. Meanwhile, his brother Shamash-Shum-Ukin has been handed the keys to the kingdom of Babylon, their father Esarhaddon's way of keeping things in the family without everyone ending up on an ancient version of Maury. But here's the rub. Babylon was like that rebellious teenager who always seemed to be one step away from a full-blown revolt. And Shamash-Shum-Ukin, instead of playing the dutiful little brother, decided he was more suited to playing the role of the tragic hero, or perhaps the villain, depending on who you ask. The sibling rivalry that followed was less Brady Bunch and more Game of Thrones. The tension between these two royal siblings had been simmering since they were kids, but it boiled over in 652 BCE, when Shamash-Shum-Ukin declared himself the rightful ruler of the entire Assyrian Empire. Talk about a power move. He allied himself with Elamites, Arameans, and a gaggle of other disgruntled local rulers, thinking that the enemy of his enemy was his friend. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for him. Ashurbanipal, never one to back down from a challenge, responded with a mix of military might and Machiavellian cunning. He wasn't just a bookworm, after all. The Assyrian king unleashed his army, and what followed was a civil war that could have made Shakespeare throw his quill in despair. The conflict raged for 4 years, a brutal saga with enough plot twists to make a soap opera seem tame. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a knife. On the one hand, you have Ashurbanipal, a man who could quote ancient texts and solve complex astronomical puzzles. But when it came to keeping his own family in check, he was as effective as a chocolate teapot. On the other, Shamash-Shum-Ukin was playing the role of the underdog who bit off more than he could chew. It's a classic tale of brains versus brawn, strategy versus ambition, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of the Assyrian Empire. What's fascinating about this sibling showdown is the sheer scale of the resources involved. Ashurbanipal didn't just send a few troops down to Babylon and call it a day. Nope, he went all out. The war consumed resources at an alarming rate, stretching the empire's economic limits. Troop mobilization, supply chains, and the logistics of laying siege to a city were costly endeavors, and we're talking in the realm of thousands of talents of silver, a sum that could make a modern banker's eyes water. And then there's the human cost. The civil war devastated the region, with countless lives lost and entire cities sacked. Babylon itself, once a crown jewel of the ancient world, bore the brunt of the conflict. When Ashurbanipal's forces finally breached the city's defenses in 648 BCE, they didn't hold back. The devastation was total, a scorched earth policy that left Babylon in ruins and Shamash-Shum-Ukin's dreams of power in ashes. Quite literally, as the rebel prince reportedly took his own life rather than face capture, a tragic end to a tragic tale. In the aftermath, Ashurbanipal emerged victorious, but at a steep price. The civil war had drained the empire's coffers and left a legacy of bitterness and resentment that even 100 clay tablets of reconciliation couldn't erase. Yet, like any masterful PR campaign, the scribes in Nineveh worked overtime to spin the narrative in the king's favor. Ashurbanipal was portrayed as the savior of Assyria, the king who restored order and kept the empire from disintegrating. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some grand victory march. It was the beginning of the end. The civil war weakened Assyria's grip on its territories and left scars that would never fully heal. The empire was like a once mighty oak tree, still standing tall but hollowed out from within, its strength sapped by internal strife and overextended ambitions. And here's the kicker. While Ashurbanipal was busy dealing with familial treachery, the rest of the world wasn't exactly hitting the pause button. External threats loomed large, with rebellious factions in the empire's fringes smelling blood in the water. The Persians, Medes, and Scythians were all watching with hawk-like intensity, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. In the end, Ashurbanipal's legacy was one of contradictions. He was a king who could outwit scholars and intimidate generals, yet he was brought to his knees by the one force he couldn't fully control, his own family. It's a tale as old as time. Power, ambition, and the inevitable downfall of those who reach too high. As we close this chapter, remember that Ashurbanipal's reign, with all its intellectual brilliance and brutal realities, was a microcosm of the human experience itself, a testament to the enduring struggle for power and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. But don't hang up your historian hat just yet. There's more to uncover in the life of Ashurbanipal, where the echoes of history continue to resonate, and the past remains a distant mirror reflecting the complexities of the present. Stay tuned for the final act of this extraordinary saga, where the fate of an empire hangs in the balance, and the king's legacy takes its final shape. So, here we are, at the twilight of Ashurbanipal's reign. You'd think a guy who spent his life balancing books and battles could hold his empire together, right? But history, with its razor-sharp irony, had other plans. As Ashurbanipal aged, the Assyrian Empire started to look less like a well-oiled machine and more like a house of cards in a windstorm. Now, let's get one thing straight. Ashurbanipal wasn't just twiddling his thumbs as things fell apart. He was still the king who knew his way around a library better than most of his generals knew the battlefield. But as his hair turned grey, so did the prospects of his empire. The fact that he was both a scholar and a warrior might have been his greatest strength, but it also proved to be his Achilles heel. First off, the economy. Ah yes, the lifeblood of any empire. Ashurbanipal's decision to pour resources into his library was visionary, sure, but visions don't pay the bills. His clay tablet collection was impressive, with over 30,000 entries, but it was a financial sinkhole. Maintaining this literary wonderland meant less silver for soldiers and less grain for the people. And let's face it, when your empire spans from modern-day Turkey to Iran, you need a military budget that could make even the most extravagant spendthrifts blush. And then there were the neighbors. Oh, the neighbors. Assyria wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests, what with its long history of conquering and pillaging. The Medes, Babylonians, and Persians were all sharpening their proverbial knives, ready to carve up Assyria like a Thanksgiving turkey. It was a geopolitical game of chess, and Ashurbanipal was running out of pawns. But here's the kicker. Ashurbanipal's focus on intellectual pursuits may have blinded him to the flashing red warning signs. Sure, he knew the value of a good poem or a medical treatise, but all the wisdom in the world couldn't stop the empire's slow implosion. The Assyrian military, once the terror of the ancient world, was stretched thin, trying to keep a lid on far-flung territories and rebellious vassals. It's like trying to patch a leaking ship with duct tape. Eventually, you're going down. By the time Ashurbanipal shuffled off this mortal coil in 627 BCE, Assyria was teetering on the brink. His death was the spark that lit the powder keg. The empire, already weakened by internal strife and economic woes, began to unravel faster than a cheap sweater. The Medes and Babylonians, led by Nabopolassar, seized the moment to form a coalition that would make alliances on Survivor look like child's play. Within 2 decades, the once mighty Assyrian Empire crumbled. In 612 BCE, the coalition forces sacked Nineveh, reducing Ashurbanipal's grand capital to ashes. The library, his pride and joy, was buried under the rubble, a tragic end for a cultural beacon. The fall of Assyria was swift and brutal, a testament to how quickly empires can collapse when stretched beyond their means. Now, let's talk legacy, because this is where things get juicy. Ashurbanipal's reign is a paradox wrapped in a conundrum. On one hand, he was the last great king of Assyria, a ruler who dared to dream of a world where knowledge reigned supreme. On the other, he was a king whose grand visions might have hastened his empire's demise. Historians have argued for centuries whether he was the last great king or merely the last king with a great library. Ashurbanipal's library, with its vast collection of texts, was a monumental achievement. It preserved the knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia, a treasure trove of wisdom that would inform future civilizations. When archaeologists uncovered the library in the 19th century, it was like discovering the Rosetta Stone of the ancient world. Those clay tablets contained everything from the Epic of Gilgamesh to detailed records on astronomy and medicine, a veritable time capsule of human achievement. But here's the uncomfortable truth. While Ashurbanipal's library was a triumph for human intellect, it couldn't save his empire from the harsh realities of geopolitics. His focus on intellectual pursuits, while noble, may have been a distraction from the pressing needs of a sprawling and fracturing empire. It's a classic case of being too focused on the forest to see the trees, or in this case, too busy with tablets to notice the empire crumbling around him. In the end, Ashurbanipal's legacy is a cautionary tale about the delicate balance between culture and power. His reign reminds us that knowledge, while powerful, isn't a substitute for pragmatic governance. Empires can't be built on scrolls alone. They need the solid foundations of economic stability, military strength, and diplomatic savvy. So, was Ashurbanipal the last great king, or just the last king with a great library? Perhaps he was both. His reign was a testament to the enduring power of knowledge, but also a stark reminder of the limits of intellectual ambition. As we close the book on Ashurbanipal, let's remember him not just as a king, but as a complex figure whose dreams and realities were as intricate as the cuneiform on his beloved tablets. And there you have it, the saga of Ashurbanipal, a king who tried to conquer the world with wisdom, but was ultimately undone by the world's unruly ways. As we step back from the ruins of Nineveh and the echoes of history, we're left with a story that's as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. In the grand theater of history, Ashurbanipal's life was a play of grand ambitions and inevitable consequences, a tale of how the pursuit of knowledge and power can both illuminate and consume. The chill of the Scandinavian dawn greets you with the kind of embrace only a Viking morning can muster, brisk and demanding. As a blacksmith, you're up before the sun, which means you've got a front-row seat to that hazy twilight that teeters between night and day. It's both beautiful and bone-chilling, but there's no time for poetic musings when there's iron to be shaped and history to be hammered out. In the 10th century, your role as a blacksmith isn't just a job, it's a pillar of Viking society. Forget about raiding and pillaging for a second. Behind every warrior wielding a deadly weapon is someone like you, who made sure that axe wouldn't snap in battle. You're the unsung hero of the Viking age, the linchpin of both conquest and cultivation. The economy of the time doesn't revolve around gold or silver, but iron. It's the currency of survival, and your forge is the mint. Today, you're working with barg iron, a substance as mundane as it is magical. It's not glamorous, but it's what you've got. You find it lurking in swamps, forming lumps of ore that, thanks to the wonders of chemistry, can be coaxed into something far more valuable. This isn't your run-of-the-mill metal. Barg iron is renewable. As the marshes replenish, so does your supply, allowing you to keep up with the incessant demand for tools and weapons. Let's talk myths for a moment. You're not some mystical warlock conjuring up enchanted armor. And those horns on Viking helmets, pure fantasy cooked up by 19th century romantics with a penchant for the dramatic. Viking helmets were practical affairs, conical, round, and horn-free. Why invite a handy grip for your enemy to use against you when it's much simpler to go without? So, while your work does fuel legends, you're more about practicality and less about theatrical flair. As you fire up the forge, you know that every piece you create is vital. The Vikings aren't just warriors, they're farmers and traders too. They need plows as much as they need swords. Your work doesn't just bolster the economy, it shapes the very landscape, turning soil into sustenance and iron into influence. Without you, the Vikings might have been stuck in the mud, quite literally. The day is long, and the work is demanding. You wield your hammer with precision, a skill honed over years of practice and necessity. It's not just about brute force, it's about rhythm and finesse, a dance with the elements. Every clang of metal on metal is a note in the symphony of survival. As a blacksmith, you hold the power to change the course of a day, a raid, or even a season. Let's not forget the economics of your craft. Iron isn't just forged, it's traded. A well-crafted sword or a sturdy plow can be worth its weight in livestock or grain. You're not just a craftsman. You're an entrepreneur in an age where the marketplace is as unpredictable as the seas. The value of what you produce isn't fixed. It's fluid, shaped by need, scarcity, and the occasional whim of fate. As the morning mists begin to lift, so too does the veil of mystery surrounding your craft. You're part of a network that extends beyond the village, links of iron connecting communities across Scandinavia and beyond. While the warrior might venture forth to distant shores, your creations ensure they come back. You enable exploration and expansion, and in doing so, you're as much a part of the Viking narrative as any explorer or king. Remember, the life of a blacksmith is not just about brawn. It's about understanding the materials you're working with, knowing their limits and their potential. The barg iron you use might be humble, but it's adaptable, moldable, and reliable, qualities that, come to think of it, aren't unlike those prized by the Vikings themselves in their people and possessions. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows and warming the air, you take a moment to appreciate the complexity of your role. You're an artisan and a strategist, balancing the demands of the present with the possibilities of the future. Each piece you create is a testament to your skill and an investment in the community's prosperity and security. The day rolls on, and with it comes the realization that your work isn't just for today. It's for tomorrow and the days that follow. It's for the harvests that will feed the village and the battles that will defend it. You're crafting the tools of continuity, the implements of existence that ensure the Viking saga continues to unfold. So, while others may sing songs of glory and heroism, let them also sing of the hands that forged the path, one hammer strike at a time. This is your day, and with each spark and clang, you're shaping not just metal, but history itself. As the clang of your hammer resonates through the air, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of blacksmithing in the Viking Age. This isn't your average DIY project with a YouTube tutorial and a trip to the local hardware store. Nope, this is a full-on production, where the tools of the trade are as critical as the skills you bring to the anvil. First up, let's talk about the forge, your very own fiery beast. It's not just a place, it's the heart of your workshop. Without it, you might as well try to make bread without an oven. Your forge is where the magic, or rather the painstaking science, happens. Picture a squat, stone structure, perhaps built into a hillside to protect it from the wind. It's fed by a bellows system, usually operated by an apprentice or two. Because who doesn't want extra hands when you're playing with fire? This setup transforms your humble barg iron into something more robust. The temperature, we're talking about 500 degrees Celsius, or around 700 degrees Fahrenheit for those keeping track. That's harder than a midsummer day in a sauna-loving Swede's wildest dreams. Now, onto the tools. Your hammer isn't just a sledge, it's an extension of your arm, a partner in this dance of creation. Whether it's a peen hammer for shaping or a flatter hammer for smoothing, each tool has its role. And then there are the tongs, your best bet for not becoming the Viking world's first handless blacksmith. They come in all shapes and sizes, and each is designed for gripping different types of metal workpieces, like the jaws of a well-trained guard dog. Let's not romanticize the image of the solitary blacksmith, toiling away in isolation. This was a communal affair. A Viking blacksmith shop was a hive of activity, with apprentices learning the ropes, crafters working side by side, and the occasional curious villager hopping in to see what the clanging was about. It was as much a social hub as it was a place of trade. Think of it as the original open-air concept, far less sterile than today's modern offices, but infinitely more vibrant. Now, onto the steel-making process. Steel is the creme de la creme of metalwork, and getting it right was no small feat. It's all about the carbon content, a balancing act between too brittle and too soft. Your goal is to get it just right, like the porridge in Goldilocks' story. This is why a well-forged sword was worth its weight in gold, or more accurately land. A top-notch blade could set you back the equivalent of a small farm. Yes, that's right, a farm. These swords weren't just instruments they were status symbols, investments in security and prestige. But don't think you're working alone like some lone ranger. This is where the myth of the solitary smith falls apart. Blacksmithing was a networked activity. Suppliers of ore, charcoal makers, and the local community all played a part in this industrial ballet. It's a far cry from the romantic vision of a grizzled old man pounding metal in a secluded hut. Right, this was the Iron Age equivalent of a bustling tech startup, minus the bean bags and ping-pong tables. So, the next time someone waxes poetic about the solitary artisan, remind them of the realities. It takes a village, not just to raise a child, but to arm a Viking. The symbiotic relationship between blacksmiths and their communities was as vital as the iron itself. And as the day rolls on, with your forge roaring and your hammer ringing, you're not just crafting tools and weapons. You're shaping the very fabric of your world, one white-hot piece of metal at a time. As you work, keep in mind the economics at play. Iron wasn't just a material, it was a currency all its own. The value of your work ebbed and flowed with the tides of demand, scarcity, and innovation. You weren't just a craftsman, you were a key player in the economic theater of the Viking Age. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, warming your back through the open doors of your workshop, Remember that every stroke of your hammer is a note in the grand symphony of history. So, next time someone mentions the lone blacksmith trope, let them know that while one person may swing the hammer, it takes a community to keep the forge burning. You're not just a maker of tools, you're a creator of connections, a forger of futures. And as you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, you can take pride in the fact that you're not just shaping metal, you're shaping the very destiny of the Viking world. As the afternoon sun lingers in the Scandinavian sky, casting a warm glow over your forge, let's delve into the social and political perks of being the Viking Age's metal maestro. You, my friend, are more than just a craftsman. You're a VIP in this rugged world of fjords and folklore. No, you don't get a red carpet, but you do have something better: influence. Picture this. While others might be swapping stories over mead, you're crafting the very tools that will shape the next saga. Your reputation as a blacksmith isn't just about the quality of your swords or the strength of your plows. It's about the sway you hold in the community. Don't be surprised if a chieftain sidles up to you, seeking a favor. After all, those axes and spearheads aren't going to forge themselves, and your skills can tip the scales of power in more ways than one. Let's break it down. In the Viking Age, blacksmiths could wield influence akin to that of modern-day lobbyists, albeit with a bit more soot under the fingernails. Some were so valued that they traveled with their own retinue, a kind of medieval entourage, if you will. Imagine being so crucial that you're essentially a mobile department of defense. That's not just prestige. That's power with a capital P. This wasn't just a local gig, either. Blacksmiths were often invited, or perhaps strongly encouraged, to join Viking expeditions. Your ability to repair or craft weapons on the go could make the difference between a victorious raid and a retreat with tails tucked. Now, let's not gloss over the gritty details. Being a blacksmith also put you in the crosshairs of political intrigue. Your allegiance could be courted by rival leaders, each eager to monopolize your talents. And let's face it, in a world without LinkedIn, word of mouth was everything. A single endorsement from a well-placed jarl could turn your forge into the hardest ticket in town. Or conversely, a bad rep could see you cooling your heels in obscurity. Historical records, like those from the sagas and skaldic poetry, give us tantalizing glimpses into the lives of these metal magicians. The Icelandic sagas, for instance, often mention blacksmiths in reverential tones, acknowledging their skills and the political weight they carried. Take the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, where the titular hero isn't just brawn and bravado. He's also depicted as a man of craftsmanship, underscoring the importance of metalwork in Viking culture. And let's not forget the archaeological finds, tools, weapons, and the occasional smithy site that paint a picture of a bustling trade, integral to both daily life and warfare. But why was the blacksmith's role so pivotal? Well, think of it this way. In a society where your worth was often proven on the battlefield, having top-notch gear was akin to having the latest tech in today's corporate landscape. A well-crafted sword was your hedge fund, your strategic advantage. And who controlled that advantage? You did. Your forge was the epicenter of military might and economic stability, making you a cornerstone in the delicate balance of Viking power dynamics. Yet, it's not all iron and glory. The life of a blacksmith was demanding and fraught with challenges. Economic fluctuations could affect the availability of materials, and the constant demand for innovation required a keen eye and a steady hand. Plus, while you might enjoy the high status and the occasional feast in your honor, there was always the looming specter of politics. Alliances shifted as easily as the winds, and a blacksmith's loyalty was often tested. You had to navigate these turbulent waters with the deftness of a seasoned sailor, all while keeping your craft honed to perfection. Despite the potential pitfalls, the allure of the blacksmith's life was undeniable. There was a certain romance to it, the idea of shaping raw materials into something greater, of creating the very tools that would carve out history. It's no wonder that the myth of the solitary, wise blacksmith persists, even if reality was a bit more complicated. The truth is, while you may have worked with fire and iron, you were also forging the future, one hammer strike at a time. As the day wears on, you reflect on your place in this grand tapestry of history. You're not just a footnote in the annals of time, you're a chapter unto yourself. Your work supports the warriors, feeds the farmers, and empowers the explorers. You're the linchpin in a society that values strength and innovation, a society that's constantly pushing the boundaries of the known world. And as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across your workshop, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're not just shaping metal, you're shaping destinies. So, as the clang of your hammer echoes into the evening, remember that your role is both grand and grounded. You're a craftsman and a kingmaker, a creator and a keeper of peace. And in a world that's as changeable as the northern seas, your steady hand and sharp mind are the bedrock upon which futures are built. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting an amber hue over your forge, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the dragon, in the room, the mythos surrounding Viking craftsmanship. Sure, Hollywood loves its myths, but history has a few truths worth telling. First up, let's tackle the legend of the Viking sword. We're not talking about some magical Excalibur. These blades were sophisticated yet practical works of art. Take the Ulfberht swords, for example. These beauties weren't just sharp, they were revolutionary, made with carbon content so advanced it wasn't replicated until the Industrial Revolution. Talk about being ahead of your time. But don't get carried away imagining these swords as laser-etched with runes or imbued with mystical powers. In reality, they were the result of painstaking craftsmanship, forged from high-quality steel with a technique that left experts scratching their heads for centuries. And while they might have been the Viking equivalent of a high-end sports car, the vast majority of warriors wielded simpler, more utilitarian blades. After all, not every Viking was a warlord with a personal arsenal. Sometimes a good, solid sword was all you needed to make your point, literally. Now, let's shift focus to the often overlooked role of women in Viking blacksmithing. Contrary to the testosterone-fueled narratives that dominate popular culture, women weren't just passive observers in Viking society. Archaeological findings, such as those from the site at Korpang, Norway, reveal tools and materials suggestive of female participation in metallurgy. It seems that women were more than capable of holding their own in the forge, contributing to the family business, or even managing their own workshops. It's yet another example of how reality trumps myth, where the lines between gender roles were far more fluid than many would believe. Speaking of breaking molds, let's talk about the artistry in Viking craftsmanship. The Vikings didn't just make weapons, they made statements. Each piece was a canvas, adorned with intricate designs that spoke volumes about its owner. Consider the exquisite craftsmanship of the Mammon axe, unearthed from a Danish burial mound. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a masterpiece, etched with interlacing patterns and animal motifs that would make even the most seasoned Instagram influencer swoon. These designs weren't just for show, they were a language of their own, conveying stories, beliefs, and status. Of course, this artistry came at a price. Creating such detailed work demanded an eye for detail and a steady hand, honed through years of practice. And while it's tempting to picture blacksmiths as solitary artists, chiseling designs by candlelight, the truth is these pieces were often a collaborative effort. The blacksmith might shape the metal, but skilled artisans would add the final flourishes, transforming functional tools into celebrated treasures. This collaboration speaks volumes about Viking society, where specialization and teamwork were key to survival. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that every Viking weapon was a deadly masterpiece. Not quite. Archaeological digs have unearthed weapons that range from the meticulously crafted to the downright crude. Imagine a world where your cousin Sven tries his hand at blacksmithing. Sometimes you get a Ulfberht, and other times you get something that looks like it was forged by a particularly disgruntled troll. And yet, even these less-than-perfect pieces had their place in the Viking arsenal, because at the end of the day, a mediocre sword was still better than none. As evening falls, the air cools, and the glow from your forge casts flickering shadows, you're reminded of the delicate balance between myth and reality. While stories of invincible warriors and enchanted weapons captivate our imagination, it's the real, gritty details of Viking life that truly resonate. The ingenuity and adaptability of their craftsmanship, the unexpected roles played by women in their society, and the sheer artistry embedded in their creations. All of these reveal a complex tapestry woven from iron, sweat, and skill. So, while legends may paint the Vikings as mythical marauders, it's the truth of their craft that shines brightest. You're not just forging metal, you're forging history, one detail at a time. As the last light of day gives way to the stars, there's a certain magic in knowing that the legacy of your work endures, transcending myth and grounding itself firmly in reality. As the stars take their place in the Scandinavian sky, you stand at the crossroads between myth and reality, much like the Viking blacksmiths whose legacy you're pondering. Let's strip away the fantasy and dive into the legacy they left behind, a legacy that molds the metalwork of Europe long after their forges cooled. First, let's talk technique. Viking blacksmiths were the rock stars of their day, minus the groupies and pyrotechnics. Their work wasn't just a product of brute force, it was a symphony of precision and innovation. Take pattern welding, for example. This wasn't just a fancy way to make your sword look like it was plucked from the pages of a fantasy novel. It was a practical response to the materials at hand. By twisting and folding iron and steel, they created blades that were not only strong but flexible. This method didn't just disappear when the Viking Age ended. It was like heavy metal, always there, lurking in the background, ready to influence the next generation. Fast forward to the medieval period, and you find echoes of Viking craftsmanship in the swords wielded by knights and nobles across Europe. Their metallurgical legacy is like a catchy tune that just won't quit. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say the berserker, in the room, the Viking image. Popular culture loves to paint them as horned helmet-wearing, axe-wielding maniacs with a penchant for pillage and plunder. But if you dig deeper, the reality is far more nuanced. Sure, they raided, but they also traded, settled, and integrated into societies across Europe, leaving behind not just fear, but influence. They were more than marauders. They were farmers, traders, and yes, skilled craftsmen whose techniques spread across the continent. And speaking of spreading influence, let's not forget the impact of Viking metalwork on the economy. Remember, we're talking about a time when iron was as valuable as Bitcoin in a bull market. The ability to produce high-quality iron tools and weapons was like holding the keys to a kingdom's treasure chest. The ripple effect of their expertise reached trade routes that stretched from the icy shores of Greenland to the bustling bazaars of Byzantium. The Vikings were the original globalizers, if you will, and their blacksmiths were the linchpin connecting these diverse worlds. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The life of a Viking blacksmith was no walk in the park. It was hard work, plain and simple. Imagine the relentless rhythm of hammer on anvil, the heat of the forge, and the ever-present pressure to produce. It was a life of grit and grime, where the stakes were as high as the flames you coaxed to life each day. You weren't just making tools, you were crafting survival. So, what about the myths? Why do we cling to the image of the Viking as a horned god of war? Perhaps it's human nature to romanticize the past, to see it through the lens of adventure rather than reality. And let's face it, a horned helmet looks great on a movie poster, even if it's as historically accurate as a Shakespearean soliloquy in a rap battle. But the truth is, the real story is just as compelling. It's a tale of innovation, adaptation, and the enduring power of craft. As we wrap up this journey through the forge, let's leave with a bit of humor. Being a Viking blacksmith wasn't about the glory, it was about the grind. It was about taking the mundane, like barg iron, and transforming it into something extraordinary. It was about being the unsung hero of your time, the craftsman whose work spoke louder than any saga or skald. So, the next time you hear tales of Viking conquests, remember the blacksmiths who quietly shaped their world. Because in the end, the real magic wasn't in the myths, it was in the metal. In the dazzling mosaic of history, feudal Japan is the kind of fever dream that a Game of Thrones fan might conjure up after a binge session. But don't let the samurai swords and cherry blossoms fool you. Beneath this scenic tapestry lay a social structure so rigid, it could make a Victorian butler look like a freewheeling bohemian. At the very top of this societal pyramid sat the emperor, whose job was mostly to look divine and wave from the celestial balcony. Technically, he was the big cheese, the sun god on Earth. But in reality, think of him more as a ceremonial figure, like that dusty wedding cake topper you can't throw away. The real power lay with the shoguns, military dictators who made decisions like whether to go to war or what color the imperial drapes should be. From 1192 to 1868, these shoguns ran the show, calling the shots, and occasionally throwing the emperor a bone to gnaw on. Now, the samurai were the rock stars of this era, though they didn't smash guitars or trash hotel rooms. Instead, they wielded katanas and followed Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code so strict it makes your New Year's resolutions look like light suggestions. Emerging around the 10th century, these warriors began as hired muscle for aristocratic landowners. Think of them as the original Yuba, but for violence. By the time the Kamakura shogunate rolled around in 1192, the samurai had become the muscle that kept the shogun's wheel turning smoothly. The social hierarchy was as clear as a kabuki script. Samurai at the top, peasants, artisans, and finally merchants at the bottom. Yes, merchants. Those pesky peddlers of goods and services were seen as the lowest of the low, because, apparently, making money was just too practical for feudal sensibilities. This rigid class system was one of the Tokugawa shogunate's most enduring legacies from 1603 to 1868, designed to keep everyone in their predetermined lane, like a medieval version of the caste system. If you were a peasant, you might have farmed rice, lots of rice, in exchange for protection from bandits and rival clans. Relationship between samurai and peasants was a bit like a mafia protection racket. Nice rice paddy you got there, the samurai might say. Shame if something happened to it. In exchange for their harvest, peasants got the dubious honor of having a samurai sword at their back. The social order was so strict that even a peasant's hairstyle was dictated by their station. Try getting away with that in a modern workplace and see how far you get. Artisans, meanwhile, were the craftsmen who made the samurai's armor and swords. They were respected for their skills, but still had to bow to samurai whims. Merchants, despite being the economic lubricants of the society, were treated like the nosy neighbor nobody wanted to invite to the barbecue. Now, why did this system matter? It kept the peace, or a version of it, for a remarkably long time. The Pax Tokugawa, period of relative peace and stability under the Tokugawa shogunate, lasted over 250 years. That's longer than most modern nations have been around. But peace came at the cost of an incredibly stratified society, where mobility was about as likely as a snowstorm in Kyoto. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the samurai have been immortalized as noble warriors, in reality, they were also bureaucrats, administrators, and occasionally just plain bullies. They could demand your rice, your labor, and sometimes your life. Yet their legacy is not just one of martial prowess, but also one of cultural patronage, contributing to the arts, poetry, and what would eventually become the global phenomenon of Japanese popular culture. So, when you hear tales of samurai honor and peasant loyalty, remember, it wasn't all cherry blossoms and haiku. It was a system designed to keep everyone in their place, with little room for dissent. But in this feudal chess game, every piece had its part to play, and for better or worse, they played it to the end. While the samurai have been immortalized as noble warriors, in reality, they were also bureaucrats, administrators, and occasionally just plain bullies. They could demand your rice, your labor, and sometimes your life. Yet their legacy is not just one of martial prowess, but also one of cultural patronage, contributing to the arts, poetry, and what would eventually become the global phenomenon of Japanese popular culture. Now, let's sharpen our focus on the samurai themselves. Picture them as the original influencers, but instead of Instagram likes, they collected heads. They were the elite, the creme de la creme of feudal society, with a sword in one hand and a scroll of Bushido in the other. The Bushido Code was their Bible, a cocktail of honor, loyalty, and self-discipline, shaken with a splash of stoicism. The samurai were expected to live and die by it. But here's the kicker. Bushido wasn't even codified until the Edo period, long after many samurai had already carved their legends into history. Enter the katana, the iconic curved sword that's practically synonymous with samurai swagger. It was more than just a weapon. It was a status symbol, a samurai's soul forged with meticulous craftsmanship. Yet, despite the glamour and glint of their swords, many samurai led lives that were less about swordplay and more about balancing the books. Yes, even samurai had to worry about the ancient Japanese equivalent of a mortgage payment. You see, beneath the armor and the honor, samurai were just as susceptible to economic pressure as any medieval merchant. Their financial woes began with a peculiar payment system. Samurai were often paid in rice, which sounds quaint until you realize that rice was the currency of the realm. One koku, roughly 180 liters of rice, was supposed to feed a man for a year. But here's the rub. not all samurai were equal. Some received several hundred koku, while lower-ranked samurai might get just enough to make a decent sushi roll. This led to a peculiar economic conundrum. Many samurai found themselves more concerned with the price of rice than the path of honor. As the Tokugawa period progressed, the samurai class ballooned, and the rice payments simply couldn't keep up. It was the medieval equivalent of too many chiefs and not enough grain. The result? Some samurai had to find side gigs. Enter the abacus. Yes, some samurai turned to bookkeeping and administrative roles, swapping their swords for ledgers. Who says you can't be a warrior and a number cruncher? The financial grind didn't just stop with rice. Samurai had to maintain their image. After all, armor and weapons were expensive, and so were the trappings of high status. Ever tried maintaining a warrior's wardrobe on a poet's budget? It's like trying to run a Ferrari on a bicycle pump. The paradox of the samurai was that while they were at the top of the social ladder, they often found themselves clinging to the economic rungs with white-knuckled determination. Despite their financial tribulations, the samurai still had to project an aura of power and invincibility. This often meant living beyond their means, a practice not entirely unfamiliar to modern-day credit card warriors. The samurai were expected to host lavish events, sponsor cultural activities, and maintain a retinue of followers. All of these expenses were not just for show. They were essential to maintaining the social order. A broke samurai was a dishonored samurai, and dishonor was the ultimate faux pas in samurai society. But let's not paint all samurai with the same brush. While the image of the noble warrior remains etched in our collective consciousness, the reality was far more nuanced. Some samurai were little more than thugs with a license to bully the peasantry. They enforced the rigid social hierarchy through intimidation and violence, all while reciting poetry about cherry blossoms and the fleeting nature of life. Romantic, isn't it? Yet, amid the grit and grime, the samurai were also patrons of art and culture. They supported no theater, tea ceremonies, and the creation of exquisite ukiyo-e prints. It was a paradoxical existence, the warrior who swung a sword by day and wielded a calligraphy brush by night. This duality is what makes the samurai so endlessly fascinating. They were warriors, yes, but they were also dreamers, caught between the demands of duty and the allure of beauty. In the grand tapestry of history, the samurai are often remembered as the epitome of Japanese chivalry. But chivalry, as it turns out, was a luxury some samurai simply couldn't afford. As much as they were warriors, they were also pragmatists, adapting to the economic realities of their time with the same dexterity they used to wield a katana. The samurai's ability to navigate this slippery slope between honor and practicality is part of what makes their story so compelling. So, the next time you think of samurai, remember, beneath the armor and the allure, they were just trying to make ends meet, one koku of rice at a time. They were not just defined by their swords, but by their ability to adapt to a world that was changing as quickly as the seasons. And while the legend of the samurai continues to captivate us, it's the reality of their lives that truly tells the tale. But hold onto your katanas, because the saga of the samurai doesn't end here. There's more to explore in the dense thickets of feudal Japan, where the shadows of honor and survival continue to dance in the flickering light of history. While the samurai were busy juggling their katanas and account ledgers, let's turn our gaze to the peasants, those unsung heroes of feudal Japan who toiled in the mud so everyone else could enjoy their sushi. These folks were the backbone of this whole medieval operation, the unsung roadies behind the samurai's rock star show. Sure, they didn't have the swagger of a samurai or the coin of a merchant, but without them, the entire system would have collapsed faster than a house of cards in a typhoon. Let's start with the nitty-gritty, taxes. If you think filing your annual return is a headache, try doing it in 17th century Japan when your taxman wields a sword. Peasants were on the hook for anywhere from 40% to 60% of their annual rice yield, a hefty price for the privilege of not getting skewered. These taxes weren't just a way to keep the samurai's rice bowls full. They were the lifeblood of the economy, feeding everyone from the local daimyo to the emperor himself. Talk about trickle-down economics, feudal style. Now, imagine you're a peasant, knee-deep in a rice paddy. Your life revolves around the seasons, the cycle of planting and harvesting, and the whims of Mother Nature. The work was backbreaking and relentless, And yet, it was more than just subsistence farming. Peasants were often skilled in various agricultural techniques and innovations, such as double cropping, which allowed them to grow more than one crop per year. They were like the original agricultural entrepreneurs, finding ways to make the most out of the land they had, even if they didn't own it. Despite their lowly status, peasants were indispensable to the feudal system. The samurai might have had the swords, but the peasants had the rice, and without rice, well, no one gets to be a samurai influencer. They were the foundation of the social hierarchy, supporting the classes above them like an overworked, underappreciated pillar. And while they were often overlooked in historical narratives, their contributions were vital to the stability and prosperity of feudal Japan. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being a peasant wasn't exactly a walk in the Zen garden. They faced constant pressure, not just from their samurai overlords, but also from the whims of nature. Floods, droughts, and pests could ruin a year's work in the blink of an eye, leaving them vulnerable to famine and poverty. It was a precarious existence, with survival hanging by a thread as fine as a geisha's kimono silk. Still, peasants were far from passive victims. They found creative ways to navigate their constrained circumstances. Sometimes this meant banding together to form village alliances, a sort of medieval neighborhood watch, to protect their interests and push back against overly oppressive demands. In other instances, it involved subtle acts of defiance, like hiding a portion of their harvest from tax collectors. It was a delicate dance of compliance and rebellion, with peasants walking a tightrope between survival and subversion. And then there's the myth of peasant loyalty, the idea that these folks were just happy to serve their samurai masters with unwavering devotion. In reality, loyalty was often a matter of convenience or necessity. When push came to shove, peasants could and did revolt. These uprisings, known as ikki, were not uncommon, and they could be as fierce as a samurai's glare. The most famous was the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637-1638, where peasants and ranin, masterless samurai, joined forces in a desperate bid for better conditions. It ended in a bloody crackdown, but it was a stark reminder that peasants weren't just pawns. They were players in their own right, capable of shaking the system when pushed too far. Yet, amidst the hardship, there was also a sense of community and resilience among peasant villages. Festivals, rituals, and folk traditions provided a sense of identity and continuity. They might have been mired in mud and rice paddies, but peasants had their own rich cultural tapestry, woven from everyday life and shared struggles. It was a world of vibrant colors, sounds, and stories, often overshadowed by the clamor of swords and the weight of history. In the grand scheme of things, peasants were the unsung architects of feudal Japan, building the foundations upon which the rest of society could rise. Their story is one of grit and ingenuity, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who labor in the shadows. While their lives may not have been glamorous, they were undeniably vital, their contributions etched into the very fabric of Japanese history. So, next time we romanticize the samurai's sleek armor or the emperor's divine aura, let's spare a thought for the peasants who made it all possible. They were the unsung heroes, plowing the fields and planting the seeds of an era, one koku of rice at a time. Their legacy, often overlooked, is a reminder that history is not just written by the victors, but by those who toil in the fields, unseen and uncelebrated. And as we continue our journey through the layers of feudal Japan, let's keep our eyes peeled for the hidden stories waiting to be uncovered. And just when you thought we'd exhausted the roster of feudal Japan's social caste, let's stride over to the artisans and merchants, the unsung heroes who were too busy keeping the cogs of the economy greased to worry about samurai swagger. These folks might not have had the glamour of a warrior's life, but they were the real MVPs behind the samurai stage show. Start with the artisans. Imagine a world where everything from your daily cup of tea to the sword that might decide your fate is meticulously crafted by hand. These were the artists of utility, the Picassos of practicality. They forged the samurai's armor, swords, and the ornate lacquerware that filled the shogun's banquet halls. Their work was the backbone of both Japan's economy and its culture. Sure, you might never see an artisan slap a katana made here sticker on the back of their carriage, but their work spoke louder than any marketing campaign could. Take the famous katana, for instance. Crafting one of these bad boys wasn't just about slapping some metal together and hoping for the best. It was a laborious process, often taking months to complete. The swordsmiths heated, folded, and hammered the steel to create a blade that was both sharp and resilient. Think of it as the original multi-tool, but one that could slice through a silk scarf floating in the air. Yet, despite the skill required, artisans were still considered lower on the social totem pole than the samurai, even if the warriors wouldn't last long without their handiwork. Then we have the merchants, the economic dark horses of feudal Japan. Picture the scene: bustling street markets filled with the chatter of haggling buyers and the rich smells of exotic goods. Merchants were the brokers of this vibrant trade, the lifeline of commerce in a society that officially looked down on them. Why the disdain, you ask? Because in the hierarchy of feudal Japan, making a profit was considered a tad unseemly. It was like being the kid who got rich selling lemonade, only to be sneered at by the kids who inherited their pocket money. But here's the kicker. These merchants were the ones who really kept the economy rolling. They facilitated the flow of goods like rice, silk, and even the delicate ceramics that would later captivate European collectors. Despite being ranked at the bottom, merchants became adept at navigating the social labyrinth, often amassing considerable wealth and influence behind the scenes. Some of the wealthiest families today can trace their origins back to these savvy traders who knew exactly when to hold them and when to fold them. And let's not forget the role these traders played in the global scene. Japan might have been isolated from the rest of the world during the Edo period, but a few enterprising merchants still found ways to smuggle in goods and ideas from abroad, adding a splash of cosmopolitan flair to the otherwise insular society. They were the conduits between worlds, bringing in everything from Dutch clocks to Chinese silks, and even a few European curiosities that could boggle the mind of a samurai. Now, here's a fun twist. While the samurai were busy worrying about their honor and rice payments, many merchants were quietly accumulating power and wealth. They invested in land, lent money at interest, a practice frowned upon but widely tolerated, and even managed to get their hands on some of the samurai's prized possessions. In a society where appearances were everything, merchants had the upper hand in the game of economic chess. Yet, despite their influence, merchants often had to play a delicate balancing act to avoid upsetting their social superiors. Too much success, and they risked attracting the ire of the samurai or even the shogunate. It was a precarious dance, but one they managed with the precision of a no performance. They might have been seen as the necessary evils of the economy, but they were also the silent puppet masters, pulling the strings from the shadows. In a nutshell, the artisans and merchants were the unsung architects of feudal Japan's prosperity. They didn't just craft swords and sell rice. They shaped the economic landscape, ensuring that the gears of society kept turning. While the samurai stood in the spotlight, it was these industrious folks who kept the show running smoothly, their contributions woven into the very fabric of Japan's history. As we prepare to delve deeper into the complexities of this bygone era, let's keep in mind that the stories of artisans and merchants are not just footnotes in a history book, but vital chapters in the grand narrative of feudal Japan. Their lives, filled with creativity, commerce, and cunning, remind us that history is a tapestry woven by many hands, each thread as important as the next. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the rich and intricate patterns of this fascinating period. And so, the artisans and merchants kept the wheels of feudal Japan turning, while the samurai and peasants lived out their scripted roles in this elaborate drama. But every good play must eventually come to an end, and for the feudal system, the curtain call came in the mid-19th century. Enter the Meiji Restoration, a historical shake-up that makes a modern political scandal look like a minor wardrobe malfunction. This seismic shift kicked off in 1868 when Emperor Meiji decided it was time to trade in the old feudal jalopy for a shiny new model of governance. Western influence had been knocking at Japan's door, and when Commodore Matthew Perry rolled in with his black ships in 1853, that door was blown wide open, like a polite but firm eviction notice. Japan realized it was time to modernize or risk being left behind in the dust of industrialization, like a samurai trying to duel a steam engine. The Meiji Restoration was a whirlwind of change, abolishing the shogunate and officially restoring the emperor as the figurehead of power. But don't be fooled. This wasn't just a reshuffling of titles. The entire social hierarchy got a makeover. Think of it as Extreme Makeover, Feudal Edition. The rigid class system was dismantled, and with it, the samurai's exclusive right to carry swords and collect rice stipends. Samurai were offered government barns instead of rice, but these barns were about as valuable as a kappa's promise, leading many samurai to find themselves financially floundering in this brave new world. So, what did these once noble warriors do when faced with extinction? Some adapted, trading their katanas for briefcases and entering the burgeoning world of business or government service. Others, less inclined to swap their swords for spreadsheets, became part of Japan's growing military forces. Yet many samurai found themselves adrift, struggling to reconcile their storied past with a future that had no room for their traditional skills. Picture a knight in shining armor trying to navigate a stock exchange. It's as awkward as you'd imagine. Meanwhile, the peasants, who had been the backbone of the feudal order, found their lives transformed in unexpected ways. The Meiji government implemented land reforms, allowing peasants to own the land they tilled. This was a revolutionary change, akin to winning the medieval lottery, but it wasn't all sunshine and cherry blossoms. With land ownership came taxes and responsibilities that many peasants were ill-prepared to handle. The romanticized notion of freedom and prosperity was quickly tempered by the harsh realities of economic survival in a rapidly modernizing society. And let's not forget the artisans and merchants, those industrious dynamos who had quietly thrived under the radar. The Meiji era was their time to shine, as Japan's economy shifted from agrarian to industrial, making their skills more valuable than ever. Factories sprouted across the landscape like bamboo shoots after rain, and the demand for manufactured goods skyrocketed. Merchants shed their status as societal pariahs and became the new power brokers, spearheading Japan's transformation into an industrial powerhouse. But while the nation hurtled toward modernity, the allure of the samurai and their bygone world persisted. Romanticized tales of Bushido and noble warriors became the stuff of legend, immortalized in literature and eventually cinema. Our fascination with these stoic figures is akin to admiring the flawless facade of a porcelain doll while ignoring the cracks beneath the surface. The reality of their lives, a blend of duty, economic hardship, and social rigidity, was often far less glamorous than the legends suggest. And yet, the legacy of feudal Japan endures, a testament to a society that balanced on the knife edge of tradition and change. The samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants each played their part in a complex dance that defined an era and left an indelible mark on Japanese culture. Their stories remind us that history is not merely a tale of winners and losers, but a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives, each contributing to the rich fabric of the past. As we strip away the layers of myth, we're left with a clearer picture of a society that was as pragmatic as it was poetic. The samurai, with their dual roles as warriors and administrators, embodied the tensions of a world in transition. Peasants, though often bound by circumstance, carved out spaces of agency and innovation. Artisans and merchants, once scorned, proved that economic savvy could triumph over social stigma. Together, they crafted a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire, a reminder of the enduring dance between tradition and transformation. So as we close this chapter on feudal Japan, let's carry forward the lessons learned. That history is a living, breathing entity, shaped by the choices of individuals and the currents of change. And while the samurai may no longer roam the land, their spirit, resilient, adaptable, and indomitable, lives on in the heart of a nation that has continually reinvented itself, one era at a time.